Hello and welcome back to Death and Taxes, your live stream podcast from the Australian Taxpayers Alliance. I am one half of your hosting duo, John Humphreys, and joined, as always, by Gene Tunny. Gene, how you doing?
I'm going well, John. Very glad we've made it to Easter. That's a bit of a milestone. I think it's terrific, and good to be on the show with you again. How are things with you?
Yeah, top of the world, another beautiful day in paradise. I mean, to be fair, we do make it to Easter most years, although we're going to say that every year until some point, and eventually we won't. And then I guess the joke's on us. Although, given there was a war kicking off around the world, perhaps making it to Easter is a bit more impressive this year than in previous years.
Well, we haven't had the massive panic yet in Australia, so I'm waiting for that to begin, but we'll talk about that later, I imagine.
Yes, I love your use of the word "yet" in that sentence. That's very, very promising. So today we have, as always, Gene's economic roundup. We'll talk about fuel prices, probably a bit about fuel prices, and then a bit more about fuel prices. There's inflation, RBA, the coming recession. Then we're going to get onto the politics, and again, there we're looking at basically Albo and the federal government's response to the fuel shortage and the increase in fuel prices and what I would call the coming recession. And there's some good, there's some bad, there's some ugly. We'll look into that a little bit. And then at the end, dive into the newsletter we sent out this morning, where I made the case for making the fuel tax cut permanent instead of temporary. But before all of that, we do have a guest today, but I normally ruin who the guest is early. So I'm going to try and not do that at the moment. I'll just get through the housekeeping and then I'll invite the guest on. The housekeeping is, this is live streamed. It's going out to the Facebooks, the YouTubes, and the X. I'm finally getting used to calling it X. If you're on any of those places, feel free to send us a comment. We do read them. We do see them when they come in. We put them up occasionally. And then at the end, we try to get to all of your comments. So please do put in the comments, questions, criticisms, anything else, starting with the sound K. Wherever you're watching it, could I please ask you to give it a like, give it a share, give us a follow on those platforms. It helps the algorithm to know that this is the sort of material that should be out there. So that would be appreciated. All right. With that out of the way, today's guest is someone we've had on before, and we had a big Barney back and forth arguing about everything, which was so much fun. We're hoping to do it again. We have no idea what he's going to say, so maybe we'll just agree the whole time. I suspect not. But anyway, this is Dr. Cameron Murray, one of the more interesting economists floating around the Australian space, if for no other reason than he's willing to dive into a lot of topics and give an innovative take, and you got to love him for that, if nothing else. Cam, how you doing?
Great. Thanks for having me, guys. Nice to have Brisbane's three best economists on the same call again.
Absolutely. Good to see you, mate.
Yeah, thanks.
Yeah, I think you used that line last time as well. Although back then I had the beard, of course, rocking. And you don't know this, Cam, but the beard's gone because I've joined the Army Reserves. So true story. It's not April 1st.
That's an interesting timing to do that.
Well, I started the process long before this whole Iran thing kicked off. It's an interesting timing in my life, though, being this old. I am, the old fat guy that shows up every week, so it's quite noticeable that I've passed my prime when I go there. Anyway, Cam, for people listening at home, Fresh Economic Thinking, that's Cam's group. You can find in the cliff notes on this, if you're looking on YouTube or later Substack or Rumble or Facebook, you see in the cliff notes, we've got a link there to Cam on X and also his Substack, Fresh Economic Thinking. If you're looking on X, you won't be able to see it, but just go to Substack or just Google Fresh Economic Thinking. You'll find it. It is one of the more interesting and fun Substacks, although not all of it's free, so you'll have to dance. Either pay the man some money or just accept what you're given. But go and check it out when you can. Anyway, before we dive too much into arguing with each other, which we haven't planned this beforehand, but I just know somehow we will. But before we do that, we have the part at the beginning of this session where, of course, if you're listening to this and you are a normal person, not like us economists, you probably spent your week doing normal things, which means you haven't been following the economic news of the day. God bless you. That's the way to live life. But of course, you should know these things. We have a solution for you. You don't have to watch the news every day. You can ignore the news for a week. Come here, get the download from Gene, and in 10 minutes, learn everything you needed to know from the last week in economics. So with that as a way of introduction, Gene, what do we need to know?
Yeah, thanks, John, and good to have you here, Cam. Well, the big news of the last week or so, I mean, we're still talking about Iran and what it means for global markets, and we're very worried about our fuel supply still here in Australia. And our PM yesterday had an announcement in the evening, and half of Australia must have stopped to watch that, and we didn't really learn much new. It was a very strange announcement. I imagine we'll talk about that later. I'm wondering if he actually chickened out from saying something more substantive, whether they were planning to announce something and then they backed out because they figured it was just politically unpalatable at this stage. But I mean, who knows? So that was a bit of a non-event. But what was not a non-event was Donald Trump's speech from the White House today, where he essentially massively moved the oil market. I mean, sent oil prices soaring by 6 to 7%, with a very strong message about the war. I mean, he's wanting to get out. He's wanting to wrap this up, but at the same time, he's promising to effectively, what was it, the bomb Iran back to the Stone Age, or threatening to do that. So a very strong language from the US president, which is very much discombobulated the global oil market even more. And I mean, we'll start to feel even more pressure there. I mean, offsetting that, of course, is the decision that I know we're going to talk about later, John, of the federal government to temporarily, or what is it, halve the fuel excise for 3 months. So that'll result in a significant saving. And then the states, what are they doing? There's with the GST. I mean, we can talk about that later. That's another significant policy announcement where they will use the money that's coming in, the GST on the additional GST they'd be getting from the higher oil prices to actually help reduce the excise further. So that's another measure that'll provide a little bit of relief, not as much as what the federal government's doing. So I thought that's something to be aware of. The other things I'm tracking, and this is an announcement, this is a decision by the Fair Work Commission that I think will have very profound impacts on the youth labour market. And I think it's gone a bit under the radar because there's so much other news going on at the moment, but it potentially has very significant effects where the Fair Work Commission has essentially ruled that older teenagers will have to be paid at adult wages. So in some of these awards, you have junior pay rates, and that's to reflect that the juniors maybe have less skilled. They're not as skilled, or maybe they don't have the same motivation as older workers. So you pay them less, and and it also helps get them a job. So the problem now is that the Fair Work Commission said you've got to pay a lot of these older teenagers as adults, and we could see some of these wage rates going up 40%. So momentous 40% pay ruling set to reshape jobs for teens, which is going to raise the cost of hiring those teens. And I mean, we can all, as economists, we can all expect what's going to happen there. So it's going to have a significant adverse impact on the demand for labour for those teens. So I think this is bad timing, particularly as we're going into a downturn. That's very likely, and this is not going to be good for teenage employment. So something I'm really concerned about. The other thing I've been tracking is just the ongoing, housing affordability crisis we've got in Australia. And the latest data point, Cotality released its rents data earlier this week, and we see rents continuing to go up at a fast rate of 7% per annum. I think I calculated it. I saw Leith Van Onselen had a figure of 5 to 6. So it just depends on the exact data source that you're using, I imagine. But yeah, we just see that very steep upward trajectory continuing. And we all know that's associated with that big pickup in population we had post-pandemic and the very strong immigration that we've got in Australia that despite government efforts to try to reduce that, I mean, it's coming down nowhere near as much as it needs to. So, yep, they're the things I've been looking at, John. Those are the big news items I think are important that we need to know. Any thoughts? Anything you think we also should be talking about, or Cam for that matter?
Well, I'll just throw to Cam first. Is the new guy on the block?
Yeah. Thanks, guys. The pay rise for the 18-year-olds is interesting. I have with an 18-year-old son who's working and looking up his pay rates all the time. That one hits close to home. So essentially, what's happening is that instead of being an adult at 21, you'll be an adult at 18 and have to pay the full award rates. But currently, what happens is when you're 20, you only have to be paid 85% of the full rate, and when you're 19, you only have to get paid 75, and all the way down to 15. And so those proportions are going to get compressed into younger ages. So yeah, it'll be really interesting to see what happens. It's already true that the awards are incentivized to employ 15-year-olds and not 20-year-olds in general. Domino's most weeknights will be staffed with 15-year-olds and the 18-year-old will be in charge. I'm not sure it will have enormous effects, but it'll be really interesting to study. Maybe we should be all looking at what data we can collect to study this.
Yeah, well, I think this
what
is
age
one
bracket
for
are they
years.
compressing it? What age bracket are they compressing it into? Sorry, gents.
So it's phased from 15 to 21. Each year age, it's a declining percentage of the full award. And what's going to happen is it's going to have to reach 100% at age 18 in 4 years' time once it's phased in, instead of reaching 100% at age 21.
Okay.
Yeah, that's how it's going to operate. So very interesting. And on the rent data, it's quite interesting too. Just for a little bit of context, if you look at New Zealand and Canada, rents and prices have been falling for maybe 2 years in both of those places after they went through a period like we had of what's going to bring rents down? Will prices ever fall again? And it pretty quickly shifted to, the biggest problem in housing now is prices and rents are falling, not rising. So
who's saying that?
Yeah,
is that a political commentary? Or
Canada just announced a tax. So in Canada, there is GST on the value add of new housing construction. They just announced a GST refund on new housing construction to sort of bail out property developers with sort of 10 or 15% tax break. So that's their concern now, that falling prices mean no one wants to build anything, because of course prices are a signal. Don't produce more of the things that are going down in price, and that's become a problem there.
And Cam, with Canada,
so just to back up on that one a second, is that they're worried that with falling prices, but also not enough housing simultaneously? I mean, the falling prices kind of indicates that they should worry less, shouldn't it?
Yeah, I agree. I mean, this is the funny thing, right? Like, prices are falling and they're going, no, you can still have a shortage and prices come down. There's this magical extra other type of thing that we're having right now. And it's fine. I want more stuff rather than less stuff, including houses. I'd like to be richer rather than poorer as a country. But yeah, that's the way people see it, right? They've got in mind that we don't have enough houses because that's the story we told when prices went up. Now prices are coming down. They're like, but I need to protect my story and we still need more houses, even though the price signal has changed. That's how I read it.
Cam, can I just ask, am I right that the big thing that's happened in Canada is they've essentially turned the population growth around, haven't they? They've actually had... Did they have a negative quarter of population growth or something because they've cut back on immigration?
They did. I think they may have even had 2 negative quarters. I could just quickly Google that. Yeah, they have.
How did they achieve that?
A lot of it. Well, a lot of the foreign students are leaving. I don't think they got their visas extended. I don't know the exact way it was all implemented, but a lot of the temporary visa categories that used to just roll over, now you kind of have to leave. You don't get to stay as long as you thought you might. And I think the criteria for coming in is now a lot tighter. And also now that, the economy's falling, it's a less attractive place to migrate when you're not getting offered a job to move to Canada anymore. So there's that sort of incentive effect as well.
Are they actually in a recession, the Canadians?
Well, I mean, we don't know if they're in a technical recession the last couple of months. In per capita terms, I think they're doing okay. But what's really interesting in Canada is that real GDP per capita has not changed for a decade. So Canada in 2025 was roughly where it was in 2015, 2014, 15 time. All the gains in the size of the economy have been matched with the number of people, and there's just no net gain in GDP per capita in Canada in a decade. I've written about that before. It's called the Lost Decade Trophy passes from Japan to Canada.
I hate to break it to you. It's probably not breaking it to you, so I hate to break it to the audience. In Australia, GDP per hour worked has not increased for the last, I think, 9 years. So they're coming up to our own lost decade of GDP per hour worked. We are working slightly longer hours. I am questionable whether participation is something that we actually should be celebrating as much as we do in this country. So I don't know if that's a good thing.
Yeah, well, participation's quite high still, and participation of over 65s is growing at a record pace. So to sort of link back to another big story people worry about, the aging population, and we have to support all these old people. There's more people over 60 working than under 24, right? So we've got this idea that 15 to 64 is this sort of working age, but hardly anyone 15 to 24 really works more than casually. They're studying, they're at school, etc., etc. But now many more people over age 60 are working. So the actual age window of when we work is shifting as well. So I guess that should ease some concerns about aging and dependency and things.
Yeah, I think we've discussed this before in part. I am one of those fearmongers that you wave your hands at. Look, I accept that the participation rate of people over retirement age, over 65, I think most of the stats look at now is increasing. It's just that the trajectory of the aging population and then the shrinking population is such that whatever the problem is, it keeps getting worse unless something's going to change. And if it keeps getting the increase in participation rate over 65 can't go up infinitely. But at the current trajectory, it seems that the population can go down without end. So something will come along and change that. I'm sure. Humans aren't going to die off yet. But as of yet, other than betting all your cards on ultra-Orthodox Jews and Mormons and what's the other group? The people who don't believe in technology, the Amish. The Amish have great fertility rates. Other than betting your house on those three groups, I think this is a problem that is yet to play out, and it's going to be the biggest issue of the 21st century, in my opinion.
Just on the Amish, I'm not sure they don't believe in technology. Don't they believe in doing a cost-benefit analysis of new technology? They're just not going to take up any new technology that comes along. It actually has to improve their lives.
Yes, you are right. I couldn't give every nuance in an off-the-cuff comment about Amish, making a different point, but you have picked me up correctly there. Although I do believe there's a breakaway.
As the bringer of positive news before we move on, John, South Korea, right, was the poster child of low fertility and marriage, but apparently there's been in the last 6 months a marriage and fertility resurgence. So let's have some positive news on that front while we're updating the audience on the latest news.
Maybe we should dive that. We did a few of these in the past, Gene. Maybe we should go and check out the latest data, or maybe even come back with Cam to give the positive version. I haven't looked at it lately. I think the problem with Korea is they're past the point of no return. Even if they're at 0.8, 0.7 fertility, roughly 2 is replacement. They say 2.1. It's actually like 2.02, but whatever. That's they're so far off replacement. If they've had a boom, I wonder if that means they've gone from 0.8 to 0.9. If they don't go straight up to about 4 or 5, they just won't have enough people of childbearing age to be able to have enough kids to start changing the trajectory. So I suspect it's already too far gone there. We're just going to it's going to be really interesting when
Let's
people
do the
look at
maths and
rising
come back.
populations in North and South Korea in about 50 years' time. I suspect the North will just be able to walk into Seoul, and the last 4 people left in Seoul will just hand them the keys to the city. And but anyway, Hong Kong is in just as a similar position as is Taiwan. So as is potentially all of China, but that's going to be another issue. We don't actually know how many people live in China. That's the difficulty with China, because there are incentives to give the wrong stats to your commissars there. So anyway, we're getting a little bit off track. Any other things on the economic news? So we've discussed this before, Gene, but now that you're here, Cam, inflation seems to be trending above 3%. I don't know how much you think that matters. I think we should have a lower target than our current target. So I do think we're trending too high on inflation. The market seemed to have factored in 2 more rate rises, up from the current cash rate of 4.1 up to 4.6. What's the Cam Murray take on this? Have you got some more optimistic good news for us?
Yeah, I guess, I mean, this is the way we do monetary policy. We have got inflation. We need to get people to stop spending money, borrowing money, buying new houses, employing tradies, all the things we do when we borrow money. And I think it's going to work this time. The way I've people always ask me, what do you think about these rate rises this year? And, the housing market's defied interest rate rises the last few years. Your mortgage rate's gone up from 2.5% to 5.5%, and prices just kept going. So the cost of servicing the mortgage is going up from interest rates and prices in tandem. I think this second wave we're going to see now is going to be like a psychological break, where people are actually going to realize, hey, we might not return to these 2% mortgages like we had during COVID in the next few years, like I'd hoped. We might have 6 or 7% mortgages for a decade. The current price is not worth it at those rates. So that psychological shift, I think, is what's going to get triggered here. And we've seen, prices falling in New Zealand and Canada in their decreasing rates to sort of support the property market. And we're still a few years before them in the cycle, trying to suppress this sort of speculative cycle we're in. So I don't, there's going to be a correction either way. We can change interest rates if the circumstances change, but if we really think monetary policy is the predominant useful tool for managing the macro stability, it's probably the right thing to do at this stage. Don't know if it's good or bad, but it is what it is. What do you guys think it's the right thing to do at the moment?
Yeah. I mean, I think it's, given the policy mistakes they've made. I mean, both John and I have been talking about how they didn't lift interest rates as much as they should have, and they started cutting too early. So yeah, I think they stuffed up there, and they've got no choice but now to start increasing the cash rate. So yes, I think what they're doing, it makes sense.
I don't. When you say macro stabilization, it implies multiple goals. I think their only goal is to get inflation down, and I'd prefer it below 2%, not between 2 and 3%. Perhaps even target 0 to 1. But so I don't think it can do anything else other than either fuck up or fix inflation. And I would prefer them to fix it if those are the 2 options on the table. But you made a really interesting point about what the consequence would be, because I noticed that you sidestepped what's potentially the less interesting part of the question. A very good political answer, Cam, and answered the better part of the question, which is what
was
will
the
come
boring?
from
There's
it,
no boring parts to monetary policy and interest rates. We're free economists.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Monetary policy is a blunt instrument. There's truth to that. It kind of depends what you think the instrument's trying to achieve. If you think it can achieve economic happiness, then yes, it's or if you think it's supposed to stop the economy growing too fast. But I think everything that focuses on employment or GDP is the wrong focus. It's just, in my opinion.
But it's the right instrument.
Too much money to slosh around the economy, then I think it'll lead to inflation at some point.
Well, John, shouldn't we make the point that it's the correct instrument because inflation's a monetary phenomenon? And
but so the correct instrument for what, though? When people say macro stabilization, I think they also have GDP and employment and a bunch of other macroeconomic data points in mind. And so that's why I had a quizzical look in my eyes when I heard that, because I wanted to know what that meant first. But yeah, I think
well, you would say
inflation.
You would say there's too much spending right now, given capacity constraints, which are causing inflation, right? And so, stabilizing that might mean, lower GDP growth, but more stable prices in the next little period. So I think, you could probably get more GDP growth with more inflation, but it might be really unstable and highly risky. So I don't think that's ideal.
Well, yeah, I think the only time that's potentially an effective trade-off is when the problem that's causing your low GDP is that you've got some sort of credit crunch. And in that situation, unraveling the credit crunch could make sense. I've got to say, though, I normally would never describe it in the sort of, and I mean this is no insult, Keynesian terms you're using. No insult, because Keynes was a great man and a great economist. But would you say spending too much? I always think of spending in real terms, and I want all the products to still be bought. And so I still think of it as the same amount of spending in real terms. But yes, I want less money to be circulating around trying to get those same amount of goods that are being bought. So I accept that your framing describes what I'm saying correctly in your language.
Yeah, but you can't kind of, this is the thing in economics, which is really hard. You can't just get the exact spending and all to go down and prices to come down and not quantities, right? Otherwise we could match lower spending and prices would perfectly adjust and would get inflation down but have the same real goods. There's going to be a quantity effect whichever way you're pressing, right? And I think that's
I don't think a quantity effect
trade-off we have to make.
Well, firstly, if the issue is that too much money is just creating too much artificial, sort of unsustainable production, then yes, winding back that is a fine thing. But secondly, if there is some amount of short-term sort of Y impact on GDP, it is short-term. Like kind of by definition, in the long run, you'll gravitate towards the amount of production you can physically do. Doubling amount of money could theoretically double the amount we produce. But if we literally don't have double the land, double the people, double the capital, we literally can't create more stuff. So I'm interested in creating a situation where we can create more stuff, not where we have sort of this artificial pantomime that's not aimed at you, but it's kind of the monetary system put on top of the real economy that I don't think is where the real action is.
So I guess the argument, you would prefer like a much lower inflation target, like 0 to 1%, like very unnoticeable amount. Is that what you mentioned that before, John?
I would like competitive private currencies, but if I must be stuck in a world of a government currency, then I'd probably gravitate towards a commodity-backed currency with a healthy amount of gold and silver. But if I can't have that either, and it has to be a fiat currency system run by the RBA, then I'd prefer roughly a 0 to 1% inflation target. My third best option.
Fair enough. I mean, the positive target is there because we think there is a quantity effect from this extra spending, right? Now, how much that adds up in the long run, or whether it just all gets into prices anyway, doesn't change the long-term growth rate. I mean, that's the argument. I don't know how true it is.
I don't even think that's the argument, though. And I think the argument is that it allows you a way to secretly cut real wages without people noticing. I mean, I always thought that was the argument for sustaining some amount of a low inflation, is that people would riot in the streets if you said we're cutting your wages by 2%. But if you said we're having 2% inflation and we're pausing your wages for a year, there's no riots in the street. And so it's a sneaky backdoor way of cutting wages occasionally. Which makes some sense to me.
I can explain. The other explanation, John, is that the idea is that if prices are a bit sticky, having some inflation means that you can have more. Like, isn't it the case that then prices are more? You can have those real declines in prices. I think that's correct.
But the only one people will riot in the streets about is wages, which is why I used wages as the example. But it's the idea is that wages are sticky downwards. And this allows you to de-stickify them in the situations where you need to.
That's correct. Yeah.
But there's some case for that, but I still think a 0% target. But were you asking about that with a follow-up question in mind, or just curiosity?
Sorry, I just wondered what you were going to ask next about the interesting part of the
Oh no,
response.
sorry. I was saying the
So-
interesting part is you went on to yeah, sure, inflation, yeah, sure, interest rates, but the impact on housing, which I mean, I should have seen that coming. I should have actually asked you that as the question, as the guru property economist of the country. But yeah, so you're actually, this is a prediction, a Cam Murray prediction here live on Death and Taxes, that we will see later this year the property market finally starts to come down in a sustainable way. You know, someone should quickly get on in touch with the news and rush this bulletin out.
Well, I think there are some people
housing
predicting
gets
that.
Guys. Yep.
I think there are some other predictions, particularly for Sydney, isn't there, Cam? I think Sydney, there are concerns about that. What's going to happen there? That seems to have got a bit out of control. Prices. So yeah, you can definitely see a correction coming there.
Well, the real action's in Perth, Brisbane, and Adelaide. Asset prices for housing are at record highs in Perth, Brisbane, and Adelaide relative to Sydney and Melbourne right now. So essentially, now if you wanted to sell up in Brisbane and move to Sydney, you'd get the most advantageous trading time now than in the last 25 years when we have good data. You can sell your 1.5 million house in Brisbane and get a relatively good Sydney house for a similar price, whereas if we went back 10 years, you know, Brisbane prices were much lower relative to Sydney. So it's been quite interesting. Sydney had a much bigger 2010s boom, especially in apartments, and they had a massive construction boom as well. And in fact, if you look at inflation-adjusted apartment prices in Sydney, they've been flat for 10 years. So you're paying today, in inflation-adjusted terms, the same asset price for an apartment in Sydney as you were in 2015. So I'm not sure we're going to get a big correction on some of those that have been pretty flat for a while, but in Brisbane's, Adelaide and Perth, you know, the next 5 years, surely there's going to be a substantial correction, and in particular, a relative correction compared to Sydney and Melbourne.
Right. Okay.
I mean, if we look abroad, we can see that. Yeah.
Yeah. Do you think how much of the impact do you think the Olympics has had? Do you think that's had a bit? That's been a big driver of the price appreciation, because Brisbane's overtaken Melbourne in terms of prices. I mean, Brisbane's now second most expensive, isn't it, in Australia?
Yeah. So partly because 30,000 people a year moved from Victoria to Southeast Queensland in the last few years. And so, you know, price is a signal, and it's telling us build more houses in Brisbane and less in Melbourne because everyone's just moved to Brisbane. But that flow rate is just starting to reverse, and we're not getting as extreme domestic migration to Southeast Queensland as we have the last few years. So yeah, I think that will all even out. But yeah, I wouldn't be buying in Brisbane this year. I'd consider it in Melbourne and maybe Sydney if I had to.
Well, not as an investment, but of course, as a lifestyle choice to come and live in the greatest city in Australia, maybe it makes more sense. But it's, I guess I would be curious about, I don't know if you've looked into this, the correlation between the city house price differential and the current, well, probably not the current quality of governance between the different cities. Maybe I don't know if there'd be a metric for the quality of public policy in the last 5 to 10 years, as maybe a lagged indicator there. I'd be curious whether these price differentials are factoring in the perceived quality of the cities as a consequence of decisions made by the people running those cities. And so this sort of Sydney premium now is a long-term payoff for previous good decisions of people who used to run Sydney. And if Brisbane is catching up now, maybe that's an indicator that the people running Brisbane have somehow run it in such a way as to make it sufficiently more desirable to attract the people. And in which case that house premium is kind of a logical consequence from good decision-making.
So you've just described the Henry George theorem of George Stigler, that basically says the optimally run city will be the most expensive because everyone will pay a premium to live there. It will have the optimal public investment and the optimal planning and design. And so if cities were corporations and competing with each other, the competitive city wouldn't be the cheapest, it would be the most expensive, because it would offer the best lifestyle. So you've just described
and what's the standard
that.
commentary? What's the standard normative commentary on that? Because it seems to me that's kind of an appropriate payoff for the people living there, making the correct decisions about who should be governing them. And then they get a payoff in that their property price goes up under their feet for making smart decisions.
Yeah, well, we could probably it sounds like you're a NIMBY though, John, because a lot of people would accuse NIMBYs of trying to make nice urban planning and design decisions that make their suburbs really nice and expensive, and they'd get rewarded for their contributions to the governance that achieved that. And I would say, yeah, that's right. I do like people who have an interest in good governance and planning of their cities. But there's a very hot debate right now about how we shouldn't have that, and we should have states take the control and bully their own policies onto people. So yeah, there's a real hot debate on that. But I think
I've become
right. The people who contribute do get the reward if they own the property, and you can think of that as like, imagine the city is like an owner's corporation, right? Like a body corporate that represents the owners collective. Well, of course, that council, being the owners collective, has an interest to do what's going to maximize everyone's returns, value, quality of life. Anyway, so look it up, Henry George theorem. Yes.
No, in terms of accusing me of being a NIMBY, I've become, I don't know, I need a better name for it, a semi-NIMBY. Now, I think I want to just let rip on development on the periphery of cities in areas that are basically someone with a farm that wants to develop a farm, some sort of situation like that. And I want to stop trying to tell people that have set up a planned community in a city that your planned community has to become high rises now. If that's, although I would, the other innovation I have on that is I want to replace all local councils with body corporates to get their internal incentives improved. I don't know if that's going to take off yet. It seems like a mild change if people don't understand it. It would be quite a radical change in terms of how things worked, I think.
Yeah, hard to say if you want the council to be democratic or more like corporate decision making, and how,
well, body corporates are democratic amongst landowners, and landowners are the ones I think probably have an incentive. They've got their incentives calibrated for the long term of that, how the land should be used.
Sydney councils also are voted by property owners, not residents.
Residents get no vote? Or I thought they did both, though. I thought residents got a vote, but you also got a vote if you're a property owner that didn't live in Sydney. It was my very imperfect understanding, but I will correct you on the spot.
Let's double check if residents get to vote as well as property owners, but I'm pretty sure. Let's have a look. Who gets to vote? Enroll to vote as a non-resident property owner, City of Sydney. If you're an owner, occupier, or rate-paying lessee of rateable land in Sydney. So if you're a commercial lessee who pays the rates in terms of your lease, you also get to vote. So very interesting. Maybe we should unpick that sometime.
Yeah, although that doesn't say you can't vote if you're a renter in the area. That just says you can enroll to vote even if you're not a renter living in the area.
Correct. Yeah, no, you're right on that point. Yeah.
Well, there you go. Yep. Maybe Sydney's got something in. Anyway, we've deviated a bit from the track, but anyway, It's good, potential good news for anyone listening at home that if you're worried about being able to get into the housing market. By the way, your crystal ball here, Cam, we won't hold you to it. I mean, this prediction so far, we'll hold you to. We'll all come after you with brickbats if it doesn't happen. But this next one, you're off the hook if it doesn't happen. How does housing affordability unpack as an issue over the next 5 to 10 years? I mean, I'll put it this way. My kids are 4, 5, and 6 years old. When they want to buy a house, if they get to their 20s and they're trying to look around for a house, is it going to be affordable anytime soon in the next 10, 15 years? 20?
Yeah. So, if you follow the land property cycle, there's going to be another good buying opportunity. So I would say in Brisbane, 97 to 2001 was the best buying opportunity prior to the 2000s boom, and 2017 to 2020 was the best buying opportunity prior to the post-COVID boom. So every sort of 20 years, you get an actual good buying opportunity in the market where, the cost of renting money is relatively low at the price level compared to the cost of renting the home. Now, since 2017 to 2022, when interest rates started going up and prices kept going, we've actually seen it become one of the least affordable periods to buy a home in the last few years. So it's quite interesting. You really got to have in mind that there is a cycle. It can't just stay expensive all the time. There will be future periods. There'll be an adjustment. And, just look at New Zealand. In the last 3 years, it's sort of halved. The cost of buying a home in terms of annual repayments for interest and rates and insurance has dropped like 30 or 40% because interest rates have come down, prices have come down at the same time. Yes, they're in a recession. You still need a job to buy a home and get a mortgage. But, the conversation there 4 years ago was, this will never end. My kids will never buy a house. And now it's becoming a good time to buy. And my conversations with my Kiwi mates are, should we be lowballing offers now? Is now a reasonable time to get in? So there's a bit more optimism there as well.
There is. I mean, you're a very optimistic contribution to today's chat.
Yes, we're enjoying it, Cam. Good stuff, man. Yes.
Well, I'll tell you what, let's segue then slightly onto, we covered a bunch of economics, coming up to 40 minutes. Let's switch into politics. And I want to see if this optimism can continue. I was kind of saddened by what I consider stupidity of the Iran war. I have no idea what your opinion is of it. I think a couple of weeks ago, I started putting out, started trying to kickstart a discussion for how should the government respond to the inevitable recession that will come if Trump doesn't just pack up and go home soon. So I'd already moved on to the coming recession weeks ago. But you have come here with optimism, armed with optimism in both barrels. So have you got any optimistic story about Trump, Iran, the Straits of Hormuz, and petrol prices?
To just be that two-handed economist for a minute, just remember there's a recession in Canada and New Zealand. That's why it's a cheap time to buy. So in terms of the people buying in the housing market, optimistic. In terms of you getting a job or a pay rise, not very optimistic. So there's that. Iran, look, again, I think I'm like you, John. I was shocked. I didn't know where it came from.
Well, I wasn't shocked. I've been predicting it for a year, but I was still disappointed.
Oh, wow. Okay. Well, then I wasn't like you. I was just annoyed. Also because I work in the Middle East quite regularly and I don't want there to be a war. I've got to go and earn some money from there. So look, the optimistic take is Trump always chickens out, right? Like that's the optimistic take. There's not much. I don't think there's more to it than that. Do you think there's an alternative optimistic view, or you're preparing for a recession? Fuel prices are up. There'll be a lot of disruption again to trade.
Look, I measure it by per capita recession anyway, so I've already been pointing to recessions for most of the last 4 or 5 years. So it's not necessarily out of character for us to dip back into a recession if petrol prices spike. So it's not a crazy prediction. Look, I'd be interested in your guys' take on this. I struggle to see what the good scenario is. I don't actually know what his options are. Like I don't even know what tacoing looks like. So he says the war's over and Iran continues bombing US bases. Does the US response to that really, oh, well, I guess we'll just get bombed occasionally? I mean, it seems like they would fight back at that point. So if he can't get out of the war, does he try to go in on land? He doesn't have enough troops. So does he just take a little bit of the land and then what? Leaves again? Well, then he has to admit defeat. He doesn't seem like the sort of person who'd be good at admitting defeat. So I would love to know what the good scenario is, but that would help me to become more optimistic if there was at least one good scenario to hope for.
It's not unusual for there to be long periods of no war, but a few missiles heading over borders in the Middle East. So there's an optimistic take. I know, for example, Yemen often shoots a missile over Saudi Arabia and has for 10 years, and it's a normal part of life. So that could be a situation. There's my attempt at optimism. Gene, what do you think?
I've given up trying to predict what Trump will do. I think even the big Trump backers think he's he's a bit crazy at the moment. I mean, Alex Jones had a bit of a rant about him the other day, essentially saying, yeah, he's lost it. I mean, I just don't think he's thinking straight. And if you ask Michael Wolff on his show In Trump's Head, he just says Trump just does what he feels on any particular day. So it's just very difficult to forecast. But currently I think we're in a worse position globally than before these attacks. I mean, now Iran isn't it levying tolls on ships that are going through the Strait of Hormuz? So he's effectively ceded control. He'd given up control of Straits of Hormuz to Iran. It's just a diabolical situation. So yeah, I think we're in for a lot more pain yet to come.
Yeah, well, I suspect Trump has lost his appetite for the war, but I'm not sure if he knows how to get out of it while retaining what he sees as his dignity. And that's the tricky part. So I don't know if Iran would be nice enough to give him something that looks like a fake win, like they did with the little mini war last year, where Trump bombed Iran, and Iran sent 12 bombs to a site and then warned Trump, saying, we're sending the bombs there. Could you come over and shoot them out of the sky so that we retain our dignity, you retain our dignity, and we could stop the war, which was a very gentlemanly thing for the Iranians to do to end that battle. I think what has happened there is Trump interpreted that as, because Iran were gentlemanly, that means they are weak. And the Iranians looked at that and thought, well, if they're going to interpret politeness as weakness, we have to stop being polite. And that's got us into a situation that is going to be much harder to get out of. Our resident Marxist, I think you might have corrected me at one point. But anyway, I do appreciate you showing up and making often interesting comments, Space. Says Trump no longer has a say in when the war ends. Iran has objectives they won't surrender. They want the US out of the Gulf, and they can achieve that objective. Look, I'm not sure they can achieve that objective anytime soon either, which is why I worry that things may simmer as a low-level battle, like you were saying, Cam, but it's still going to be an unpleasant part of the world to drive a bloody big oil tanker through while this is happening. Yeah. Look, just one other thing on that. I don't think the $2 million per ship toll is going to sustain. I think the Iranians use that as a bargaining chip because they've got other things they care more about. But what could be really interesting is if they are successful because I think they'll open up the Straits of Hormuz to all countries that are nice to them. Most countries will find a way to be nice to them, and a lot of oil will flow. But if they do then require all of those oil payments to happen in renminbi, there is a whole bigger discussion about how the petrodollar works and what happens if America fears they might be losing control of the petrodollar. So that's yet another variable in this whole escapade. Anyway, you weren't quite as helpful on the optimism front here, Cam. So,
well, I mean, doesn't Trump want the dollar to come off a little? Isn't that his whole philosophy on trade? He's the mercantilist type approach that he wants his country to export lots of stuff at a cheap price, so the dollar should be weaker.
I don't think he's thought it through on the dollar front, though. That's more of the Chinese approach to pumping up their exports. Trump's approach seems to just be put on a tariff, which, of course, the logical consequence is to put up the value of their currency in the US, which undoes a lot of the benefits Trump is trying to get. As best I can tell, he just isn't aware of that second order effect yet, which is why he still thinks tariffs work.
Yeah, and so what about Australian domestic policy? In response to all this drama.
What is this good? Do you want to take this one, Gene? Because Albo has come out now, and after a few weeks of not knowing whether it was worth calling it a crisis, has now decided to put together a response for which he announced a very important presentation live on air on all of the radio and TV channels. So what did we learn, Gene? What's the fascinating?
Well, I mean, it was essentially a restatement of what they've already announced, or what they announced earlier in the week on Monday, if I remember correctly, which is what you were supporting last week, which was a cut to the fuel excise. So that's going ahead, halving it for 3 months. But then we're all expecting him to say something like make a policy announcement. We're all thinking, he's going to tell us to work from home, or he's going to announce that after Easter we might have to start rationing fuel. But yet it just became a message, I want you to live your life as you'd normally doing it, and Australians are great. We're going to stick together. Oh, and you might want to consider don't take more fuel than you need, and because the nurses have to get to work or something like that. I can't remember what the exact phrasing was. And then it was about, oh well, we're going to be in for some hard times or something along those lines. And so we're all going, okay, so on the one hand, everything's fine, live your life, but on the other hand, try to use less fuel, catch the bus if you can, and we're in for some tough times. So it was all a strange announcement, and most of us didn't really know what to do with it. And I was thinking that his office might have, or earlier in the day, they were thinking they were going to announce something, or they had something big to announce, and they backed out of it late afternoon. They figured, oh, it's too early, we can't do this, because it just seemed like a bit of a nothing burger, as Andrew Bolt called it, and everyone was disappointed. It's not just the right-wing commentators; it's the left-wing commentators too. The Australia Institute people were disappointed by it, if I remember correctly. So yeah, just a very strange announcement, and I'm not sure it gives people more confidence. I don't think I still think there's the risk that if there are ships cancelled, if it looks like we're running out of fuel, there will be significant panic in the community. So yeah, I was very surprised by the whole thing last night.
I find myself increasingly in the position where I feel like defending the federal government. Not like 3 stars, they're doing everything perfect, but I find I guess I have a bit of sympathy with the way they're going about things to some degree. Firstly, we're all political watchers. If you're anything like me, you're updating the news quite regularly to find out where's been bombed latest and whether Trump has invaded Greenland yet or declared Panama not to exist or something else exciting that's happening on foreign policy. And I'm looking for the policy responses and indications of the coming recession, because that's kind of my job to look at some of this stuff.
Yeah.
So, and you guys are a bit similar to me on that front. And the people tuning in right now are probably a bit similar as well. We're all to some degree politically aware. A lot of Australians aren't. And I think Albo made the judgment that we've all had this conversation, all of the political chatterati, that sort of say 10% of society who's the political chatterati. We've had this conversation so many times we're bored. A good chunk, probably the majority of Australians, haven't really had this conversation yet. And he thought, well, I need to make sure I'm bringing the country with me. I'll do a big public announcement. The 10% will be bored because I'm just teaching them how to suck eggs. It's boring. But this will hopefully get the attention of the people who don't give me their attention very often, and I can just get them up to speed. And then in terms of Labor being accused of saying there's not a problem, there is a problem. Well, I think objectively speaking, we have enough petrol today and we won't in a month or two's time. So it is true to say we currently don't have a shortage. We just have an allocation problem, which is what Labor says. And then later say, oh, we are taking actions to fix the crisis. And people say, I thought you said there wasn't a crisis. We don't have a shortage today. Mm-hmm. We will in a month. You have to be able to live life through time, right? I mean, so it doesn't seem like a contradiction to me that they say the current issue is an allocation of the petrol that's in the country. We currently have enough. We're not allocating it properly. So that's the issue today. But in a month or two's time, we're going to have what I consider to be the much bigger problem, that some of the diesel and fertilizer literally might not be there. And when it's not there, you can't allocate it into existence, right? So it makes sense to plan for the coming crisis while trying to tell people the current situation maybe isn't a full-on crisis.
But John, but the situation you're describing, that sounds like a situation where we should be taking measures now. I mean, if they think there is going to be a problem in a month's time, and we're going to start planning for it, but maybe we should be taking measures now or signaling that we're going to have to start taking measures. And I think that's what a lot of people were expecting, they expected more of a solid plan from the government and didn't get it.
Well, here's look, I'm not invited to their cabinet discussions, so but. My read of this is, like, if I was in their shoes, I'd be having this, you're worried about, type 1, type 2 errors, right? And one concern that you have is that that when the crisis hits, it's bigger than expected, and we're underprepared, and the diesel shortage is more acute than it needed to be because we weren't, sort of saving up that diesel now. There is another problem, and that is we do manage to continue getting enough ships in the country that when the crisis hits, it is relatively mild. It is the 5 to 10% shortfall that we can coordinate, and that would have been manageable at the time, but we started basically imposing voluntary 10 to 20% shortfalls now to save us from a 5% shortfall in 2 months' time. And so it's kind of a diabolical problem. And I don't think anyone who doesn't have a crystal ball can confidently say they know the best way to play it. The government could get it wrong. I'm just a little bit, I guess, sympathetic to the nature of the problem they face. If they overreact now, they're imposing certain pain and certain recession to fix a problem that may not eventuate. I mean, if the Straits of Hormuz open up soon, it may be a fixable problem to some degree still. I mean, I imagine there's still going to be some problem coming through, I think, the June quarter, probably the September. We'll probably still have a per capita recession, even if it opens up today. But that recession could get much more sharp if the Straits of Hormuz don't open up or we can't find suitable replacements. And I think it's really hard to guess which one of those outcomes happen. And if you knew it was going to be a mild downturn in the future, would you guys, if you were the dictator, would you impose sharp rationing now? I mean, they may get it wrong, but I'm sympathetic to the difficulty of the problem.
Yeah.
Take your point. Can I ask a question? John, you seem to not trust the price mechanism here very much. Australia is a rich country and the oil is a global market, and surely our consumers would be willing to pay more and be less price sensitive than some in Asia. And, even with the straits closed and reallocations of oil deliveries around the world, wouldn't Australia be fared relatively well? Yes, the price will go up, but that rising price is what keeps the oil flowing to us and not to someone else who's responding much more aggressively to the high prices. You seem to have in mind this idea that price mechanism globally won't work. Why is that? I'm just curious.
And in terms of the effectiveness of it, it is at some point even better than that, because the high prices will motivate further suppliers coming into the market. That was my first instinct, where the first time we talked about this, I said, "Oh, don't worry." Now, I was not a deep expert on the nuances in the nature of the oil market. The thing that got me really scratching my head was when I found out that the way that the remaining oil supplies is going to be allocated will not be that they're auctioning it to the highest bidder, which would have been a situation where we have very high prices, but Australia would pay enough and we'd get the oil. What it's probably going to be is they just cut back to whoever was already a customer and already had pre-existing contracts. So whoever had the contracts,
when South Korea sent it off, their contracts, and get
it takes a long time to get oil from one country to another, and it also takes a lot of coordination to actually get the tankers. Australia owns no oil tankers. And so one of the issues we have is, even if we can arrange to, there's some countries in South America that potentially would be able to buy oil from. We actually don't have any easy way of getting an oil tanker over there. We don't have one of our own. We have to rent one, and everyone else is trying to rent the same ones. So, and they're not necessarily in the right place. Yeah. The point is to say, I am quite confident that this isn't a long-term crisis. And I'm confident it isn't a long-term crisis because of my ultimate faith in the effectiveness of the price mechanism. But as we know in economics, there's a difference between the short term and the long term. And in the long run, prices adjust and behavior adjusts. In the short run, it's defined as the period before the adjustments have taken place. I mean, that's like short run in economics isn't defined by a set amount of time. It's not 6 weeks or 6 months. It's literally whatever time it is when the prices haven't adjusted and the people haven't adjusted to the prices. And so I think in the very short run, we don't have a crisis. We've got a coordination issue, but we have oil. In the very long run, or just in the normal long run in economics parlance, like a year and beyond, this will all solve itself, right? I mean, these global oil distribution lines will recalibrate, and we'll get enough because we will be willing to pay enough. And if the Straits of Hormuz stay shut, it seems like indefinitely, that's not the end of the world. That's not a permanent crisis. What that is shale oil in the US is going to suddenly spike because prices will be at a point where that actually becomes economical to do much more long term. And there is plenty of oil available in the world as long as the price stays above $80 or $90 a barrel. And if Hormuz stays shut, investors will have confidence the price will stay high enough to justify those investments. So I'm not worried in the very short term, and I'm not worried in the long term. The problem is in that period between 1 month and say 10 months, I don't know when that long run exactly kicks in, is a period of time that we still have to live through. So that is the period of time where we'd want to start thinking about how it's going to impact us. And I think it will impact us as potential shortages leading to quite sharp price spikes because of the inelasticity of demand, which will then be quote unquote fixed by rationing, which will create its own set of political problems. Which is why it'd be good if the Straits of Hormuz would just open and we don't have to ever find out whether I'm right or wrong. Is that a fair-minded answer?
I'm just much more optimistic in the 1 month to 10 month period that the prices will do what prices do. And yeah, we don't have ships, but we don't need them. We have prices, right? Because whoever owns the ships wants to make money. And if we pay more than the Philippines or Indonesia or Malaysia, we'll get the oil. So I'm much more optimistic that the price will do the job of rationing in the coming months, and we'll all adapt. Electric cars will spike, people will change their holiday plans. There's a lot of adaptation we'll do in response to that price, including in the US starting shale oil wells. So
in terms of the EV, firstly, we've got an EV now, so yeah, I can get around, no problem. And I've got enough solar to be able to last and charge the EV. So I'm good on traveling, but I don't think petrol's the problem. I think diesel and fertilizer, especially diesel, is the issue, because we're going to have a shortfall in fertilizer. 30% of the world's fertilizer comes through the Straits of Hormuz. Now, Iran has let through 20 boatloads, I don't know what the technical term is, of fertilizer, which is, again, very gentlemanly of them. But there's still going to be a shortage, which is going to result in lower yields, which is going to result in higher food prices in some parts of the world. Now, that's not really my main concern either. My main concern is the shipping is all done. Tractors and trucks run on diesel. And Australia has some capacity to produce domestic petrol, but we've got much less capacity to produce domestic diesel. And that is the same concern lots of countries have. So that bidding war for that is more acute. And even if you can then get it, its price is, as you can already see, reacting in such a way as it's going to really drive up the costs of anything that needs to be, for instance, driven from a farm to a supermarket. So you may see quite significant food price changes, I think, over the coming
years. I mean,
Virgin.
Yeah. The suppliers are already pushing for Coles and Woolies to raise their prices and then, pass some of that on to them. So yeah, that we're going to start seeing that pretty soon, John.
I don't think the price mechanism won't happen. I just think that'll cause a recession.
It will, because interest rates might be, up and up, and people will stop buying and building houses, and that's a big mechanism in Australia because the construction workforce is so big. We spend as much on renovating houses as we do on building new homes in Australia, and all that's going to come down with higher rates and higher inflation. So yeah, I
don't think the higher rates are even necessary.
Has to agree that we're.
Sorry, if people are spending a lot more on food and their basics, then you don't even need the higher interest rates. By the way, can I run one other?
You don't, but it's a big, when I'm in housing, it's a big part of the economy, construction.
Can I run an idea past you on interest rates? I know we're tic-tacking back away from politics for a second, but I think, Gene, you and I have discussed this, but now we've got Cam as our victim. Now, as you heard before, I'm quite a hawk on if we have inflation, I want interest rates up to get the inflation under control. However, I caveat that with, if the inflation is coming from a one-off spike from a conflict, I think it should be disregarded in terms of the inflation you're targeting with interest rates. So to the degree that I think we are running our sort of organic, for lack of a better word, inflation too hot for my liking. But to the degree that now spikes from 3.5 up to 5.5 because of the war, in my mental model, I would disregard that extra 2% and I would still be trying to deal with a 3.5. So for instance, if we were running at 1 and it suddenly spiked to 4 because of the war, I would disregard that and just continue on with no change. What is your take on how we should deal with the inflation that comes from this sort of one-off supply shock situation?
Very good point. Well, I mean, I think I agree with you. And I think to add some flavor to that point, you can sort of tell if it's a domestic inflation issue that you might be able to manage with monetary policy, which it sort of is right now, because Australia's got much higher inflation than elsewhere. But the global oil shock, you'll see that in every country, and there's not much you can do about it individually. So I think that's just one way to see the point you're making of looking through these once-off global shocks. And I think a lot of people in the RBA are very aware of that as well.
And John, that's why we look at the core
take,
inflation measures. I mean, that's why they target, it's the trimmed mean and weighted median that they're interested in. So
I think
that should,
I think the Iran shock is going to show up in the trimmed mean, right? The trimmed mean takes out various things that they say are. Look, I think there'll be a way to see through it. As Cameron says, we'll be able to just look at what's happening everywhere in the world, and to some degree, we can. It's not that long a period of time. We can just look at what was happening in January and February because there was no war then, to get an indicator. But
so to be clear, you'd look through the decline in the petrol price when the taxes decreased on petrol, because that will come through the measurement of CPI as well.
Well, that doesn't come in the underlying one. So that's the thing that Jean's point about the underlying, the trimmed mean, I think cuts out those big variation changes that come from things like changes in petrol prices. So I would look at trimmed, and then I would look at trimmed pre-war.
Yeah. So you're making a point that you'd actually have another trim. You'd have a core inflation that takes out the second round impact from the impact of the fuel prices on the goods and services in the economy. Is that what you're saying?
So basically, a super skinny. If one of them's trimmed, I'm talking about a double trimmed. So a super skinny.
We should. I'll see if I can create one of those for you, John, for next for a future episode. It's an interesting concept. Because we've got the IO tables, we know how the industries flow into each other, right? We know how the inputs, where they're going, and what industries.
There would be observational equivalence there. I mean, if their prices are getting carried away because there's just a shit ton more money sloshing around the system needing to go somewhere, it'll show up in a similar way through the IO tables. So to some degree, it's just a matter of judgment about observing what you think of the cause is, and. This comes down to, I'm not just saying I hate like the word inflation or the symbol pi. I mean, I don't like there being too much money chasing not enough goods. That's the problem I'm trying to solve. And so if it's being caused by too much money chasing not enough goods, stop putting too much money out there. But if it's being caused by something else, a one-off supply shock that you can't control, but putting that aside as well, that's not an issue of too much money chasing not enough goods. So don't try to solve it as though it is, would be my argument.
I mean, one of the challenges is what happens if that price shock, that gets into inflation expectations, and then you end up with it being baked into that underlying, into that core inflation. So that's one of the things you have to be concerned about. You have to be concerned about whether it'll increase inflation expectations.
And, I just have to convince people I'm right to draw the distinction, right? Because if I'm right to draw the distinction and I convince people, they won't expect inflation. But also, if you expect inflation, but there's just not enough money sloshing around the economy to cause it, then that can create some uncomfortable dislodgement. But at the end of the day, it's going to eventually wind back, because if there's not enough money chasing the goods, the prices can't keep going up forever. So, but anyway, if you're agreeing with that, Cam, then I think you are being very wise and intelligent and witty and charming in this particular issue. So we have got over the hour mark. Anything else on politics? There is one other thing, actually. I asked the question and immediately answer it myself while speaking too fast as usual. There was an election. We already discussed it to some degree last week, the South Australian state election. It's now been finalised. We now know the total amount of seats being won. There was, in total, 7 Liberals elected, and in total, 7 One Nation people elected. A slight change in which house. So the Liberals had 5 in the lower house, 2 in the upper, One Nation 4 in the lower house, 3 in the upper. So the Liberals are the opposition party by 1, at least for the moment. But anyway, this brings us to the question we've been discussing a little bit. We've got some running themes in this show over previous weeks, the coming recession, the immigration issue. And one of them has been, and I'll put this to you, Cam, What do you make of the rise of One Nation? Is it permanent? Is it real? Is it being caused by a thing that we should care about? And what comes next?
I think it's probably simpler than everyone assumes. No other political party will talk about immigration except One Nation.
Yeah.
If you look at Europe, the same has happened. The new upstart, what they call far right or whatever, everyone populist, they're basically saying, here's one issue you're ignoring. This is our issue. And they get elected all across Europe. Trump, that was Trump's whole platform. And if you look in Europe, you can look at places like Denmark, where the left party said we're going to be tough on immigration, and they got elected. And so I think it's as simple as that. I think there's nothing more to it. There is just one topic where the uni party sort of ignores, but it's a very visible, real, lived topic for a lot of people. And now people try and reject that argument by saying, yeah, but look, One Nation's support is higher in the regions and there's fewer migrants in the regions. Don't really think that's evidence. You got to sort of control for the existing, beliefs of different groups as well. So you can't just say the line goes up when the line used to go up, but the level is 3 times higher. So yeah, that's my interpretation. I think if the Liberal Party just came out with One Nation's immigration policy, they would replace all of the One Nation people pretty much, depending on what elections come up in the coming years and get up. If the Liberal Party wants those seats, they should be tough on immigration. Look at Canada, look in Europe, and look at the Trump experience twice over. Do you guys think there's more to it than that?
I think you're right that immigration's the main driver. Sorry, Jane.
Yeah, I was just going to say that I think that's correct, Cam. I think what's happened is it's a lot of people my age, the sort of Generation Xers who are switching to One Nation. It's people who are old enough to remember Pauline Hanson when she first came around, and she was dismissed, and we all, there was a general view that, oh, hang on, this is a bit extreme. We don't really, think that's right what she's saying. But then I think over the next few decades, as immigration, particularly as it ramped up in the late 2000s, first at the end of the Howard government and then maintained at a very high level, and then post-COVID just really took off. I think there are a lot of people who are thinking, well, maybe Pauline Hanson was onto something. So I think it's a lot of people who years ago dismissed Pauline Hanson, and then suddenly they're thinking, well, hang on, was she right all along? And I think that's driving a lot of the people to One Nation now, particularly because if you look at where they're coming from, it's a lot of people, Generation X, sort of 45 to 55, and a lot of women too in that age group. So yeah, I think that's a big part of it.
Yeah, can I give you I think you're right that immigration is the trigger that's got people switching to One Nation and to Le Pen's National Front and to AFD in Germany and to Geert Wilders in Netherlands, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. What I think is the interesting thing to consider in Australia is if the Liberals then co-opt One Nation's policy, there is a chance people just don't believe them anymore. They've lost faith. They are no longer willing to listen to what they are saying anymore, because we've had this comment here. Libs stole One Nation policy before. They gained a lot of votes from it, but then they didn't actually do it. There is an issue of potentially of 72 times bitten, eventually shy. But people constantly going back and then eventually when they lose faith, they might lose faith for good. Now, I think there is an interesting possibility that the two options often discussed, Jane, you would have heard this before, that the two options often discussed is One Nation now has the ascendancy, right? So the Liberals will not be trusted again. And so One Nation is the future of right-wing politics because they just don't trust the alternative. Or Liberals learn from this, they adopt the policies that are working for One Nation. One Nation then trips over their shoelaces by pre-selecting some winners and a bunch of hit pieces, and then they divide and they split. They don't have a great track record at sticking together. and then goes back to the Liberals, and everything is as it was. And you may remember in '98, One Nation won 11 seats in the Queensland Parliament. By the end of that term in Queensland Parliament, all of them had quit, and then the Liberals came back soon after as a strong force. Now, those are the two options people are talking about. I think there's a real chance that both happens, that people have permanently lost faith in the Liberals, and then One Nation still trips over themselves at some point, which leaves open a really interesting possibility. Now, I don't know what comes next, but you see this in a few places. Like the UK at the moment has Rupert Lowe potentially trying to cut the grass out from under Nigel Farage. You've seen a bunch of other pretenders show up at the periphery of Geert Wilders in the Netherlands, and I know less about the other European countries. My wife suffers from Dutch, so I follow Dutch politics a bit more closely. But I think there is a possibility of this, and I don't know what that looks like. And I do catch myself wondering who is best positioned to take advantage of it, because I find both of those propositions, people have lost faith in the Liberals, One Nation trips over, they may not happen. But I find both of them very believable. They both could happen. And that creates a fascinating possibility that hasn't really existed in Australia since Menzies called a meeting in 1943 in Albury and created a new political party. And I think, is it an Alex Antic? Is it Barnaby Joyce? Is it a Jared Rennick? Like, who are the sort of people that would be able to cause enough of a stink and say a few of the key right things and be able to fill that vacuum? I don't know the answer, but
Carl
I find it a very
Stefanovic.
interesting question. No.
Well, Carl Stefanovic is essentially, I think he's making a political play with his new talk show, isn't he? Or maybe he just wants to be Joe Rogan of Australia. But if you look at the guests he's got on, it looks as if he's got a particular agenda. I mean, I think it's all good stuff, what he's saying. But yeah, he's had Clive Palmer on. He's had Drew Pavlo, Jared Rennick. It's a really interesting podcast.
What do you think of that?
I think you're right. It could all fall in a heap. And the frustrating thing is there is a view in the electorate about this topic of migration that is going to get ignored if no one can sort of organize themselves to push politically.
So there's a much scarier option. I don't think it'll be someone will fill the gap. It could be anyone, and that includes some potentially every options.
Yeah. So you think someone more extreme will fill a gap, and then people go, well, now
I don't know if they'll be
the
more or
only
less
one.
extreme, and I don't even. In some cases, I'd want them to be more extreme, but it's they could look like anything at the moment, and there's nobody that is shaped like the shape of that hole in politics. So which really leaves open a lot of imagination. But I think someone will fill it. I don't think that gap will just be filled by Labor versus the Greens, right? I mean, there is enough people wanting to vote for a party that is shares the concern about immigration. Someone will step in, and people will vote for what they see as the least bad of those options. But it just seems to me like there's a real opportunity for a well-spoken, sort of well-financed, well-presented person to be able to fill that gap. So, Cam, you putting your hand up?
Mate, I've run for politics twice, and all I got to say is the problem with running for politics is even if you win, you have to be a politician. Like, it's not a great prize. Being a politician is, I'm not really good at telling people what they want to hear. I'm not really good at I'll tell you what you want to hear so you think we're friends, but it's kind of deceptive. That is actually how you do politics, right? In the morning, you go to breakfast and you tell one group one thing. In the afternoon, you go to dinner, tell another group the other thing. They kind of contradict each other, but you just keep moving on because you're building your base of friends. And then, most people aren't bright enough to recognize that you can't do everything you've promised, and it's very contradictory. So there's my cynical take, my non-optimistic view. I actually ran on this topic in 2017 and 2019 in the Queensland State and the Federal Senate for Queensland for Sustainable Australia, which was trying to be a moderate, sort of centrist, low migration, conservationist with some green credentials type party. And, it was dirty. It was frustrating. I felt I had to do it. And
Tell us more.
yeah,
What was dirty?
Oh, what's dirty? If you print out your flyers, right, and you send them to like a private mail delivery or Australia Post or something, if the person who works there doesn't like you, they will throw your flyers in the bin rather than deliver them. And that happened to 3 people I met on the campaign trail. One guy got evidence and got his money back. One guy got told that they found all his flyers in the dumpster behind the supermarket, in the shopping center where the post office was, never got sent. People will rip down the flyers or the banners of other parties overnight before the election at the poll booths. So each party in our electorate was sending security guards and volunteers to monitor the posters from 6 p.m. the night before till polling day. It's just all this dirty nonsense.
That's normally the role of young Liberal and young Labor, to get there at midnight. If the other side isn't there, rip them down. And if the other side is there, then just sort of stay staring at them.
I don't know. And then just the deception and the lying. You pull someone up on something and they, start calling you names. I'm like, I'm just the one who said you have contradicted yourself and you're promising these people the opposite of what you promised the people at the last session. And apparently that's a personal attack. I'm like, well, what do you mean? I remember everyone getting really shitty and saying, oh, you can't point out the other person's lying. Oh, you're not playing by the rules. I'm like, you threw my flyers away. You're telling stories about me. This just the deep tribal instinct that this triggers on the campaign trail is not for me. I'm more of an ideas person, and I've realized that let other people play those dirty games, because if there are good ideas circulating, right, whoever's in power needs good ideas, right? And I think we misperceive politics as a battle of ideas, where it's a battle of tribes and personalities who'll just pick any idea that's convenient for the opportunity in front of them. So you've got to be the one circulating good ideas. I always say, the Liberals and the Greens are equally likely to do quite a lot of policies if the opportunity was there.
As long as the other one isn't.
Correct, yeah.
Look, I think there is potentially a moment coming. I don't think we're there yet in Australia, but people are already saying they want authenticity. Now, I think you could potentially get to a point where the desire for authenticity becomes so strong. At the moment, I think there is a real desire for authenticity, but there's a stronger desire to hear what you want to hear. And so it still outweighs it at the moment. But on current trajectory, you could get to the point where the desire for authenticity becomes so great that you could have a sort of a rabid truth seeker and truth teller come through the middle there. So that's possible. They say authenticity is the most important trait. If you can fake that, you've got it made. But the other thing, when you were talking about your campaign experience, it reminded me of this. I think this is attributed to. I heard it from Michael Malice anyway, the very interesting comedian, anarchist American. And he was saying that a lot of people people think that people see the world through a true-false lens. Most people see the world through an us-them lens. So when you make a truth statement, they're passing it for, how does that align with the us-them game that I'm playing? So if what you're saying is true and helpful, they will embrace truth as a convenient temporary step towards the us-them game. And us numpties, Cam, I think you and I share this. We disagree on a bunch of issues, but I think we share the trait that we see the world through a true-false lens. And so we can be easily tripped up by people who, if we think we're having a true-false conversation and they're having an us-them conversation, we can very easily talk at cross purposes, really not understand each other, and both of us walk away shaking our heads going, what an idiot. So you need to know what game you're playing before you play it.
That's really helpful. Thanks, John, because I often find in conversations, people will tell me, so are you trying to say you're with the government on this or you're with them? And I'm like, I'm not trying to say who I'm with. I'm trying to explain economics, right? And you're trying to pick, not like, is this the truth? Does this make sense of the world? But were you with them or them? What are you trying to tell me here? And I've had that before, and it's like, it just like, short circuits my brain sometimes. I'm like, are you not even interested whether it's true or not? You're just trying to pick if I'm with them or with them. And it gets me into trouble. People from all sides kind of hate me sometimes when I disagree with their tribe. So maybe I'm like you on that
Well, I think a lot of people have very little interest in the true false lens, which drives me batty because I don't know how you can try and get close to the truth without caring about it. But at the same time, when I realized this, I realized that I'm also at fault in the inverse direction. There is an us-them game out there. It is true. It is real. I can't wish it out of existence. And if I refuse to play it, I'm being an idiot. So you have to be able to, I think, simultaneously keep both conversations running in your mind simultaneously, and try and find a way to help your us while being as truthful as possible and getting the rest of the us to shift closer to the truth when you can, if that makes sense. So I spent far too long just being totally sort of autistically naive about the sort of the us-them fights happening all around me. And I found it much easier to learn to speak to humans once I realized that was the nature of the conversation. So join me, Cam. Join me in that.
Brilliant. Thanks, mate.
So anyway, that was our sort of One Nation political detail. Got good chats going in here. By the way, I left this one up so I could put it up at the right time. Yeah, Pete, I will look into that. I'll give it some consideration. I don't know if it'll work, though. I don't know if it'll take off. We did have a great candidate for Parks a while ago, Pete. You may have heard of him. That was Pete, by the way, Cam. Just here. The last part that we do in this show is we run through the newsletter, which could spark some interesting debate in this room as well. This week, we put out a newsletter each week, the Australian Taxpayers Alliance. You can find us at taxpayers.org.au or Oz Taxpayers, AUS Taxpayers.substack.com. Please go there, check out what we're doing. If you like what we're doing, become a member. A couple of bucks a month helps us to keep the lights on. If you don't want to give us money, that's fine too. You can still access pretty much everything we do. We want to be involved in the debate, and we do that by putting it all in front of the paywall, which is probably a very bad business model, but that's how we're doing it. So go there and check it out for free. Please sign up to the newsletter. If you've signed up already, you would have seen the newsletter from today. If you haven't seen it, that means you're not signed up. So go and sign up. That's all free. And as I said, if you like it, give us a few pennies. Or if you're rich, give us lots of pennies. That works too. This week, the newsletter was about the fuel tax cut, and my pitch was that the fuel tax cut should be made permanent. Now, I kind of had two cheers for this policy idea, because I think there's two ways of potentially getting to a fuel tax cut. And I think they have taken the wrong path to get there, which I think can be dangerous, but it does at least give us some sort of fuel tax cut. So I don't want to complain too much. It is quite easy to constantly find the things that are imperfect in politics. But I can see lots of paths in politics that are far worse than the one we're on. So I don't want to throw too much shade. So I appreciate that they are looking at a fuel tax cut. But I do think the mentality for this fuel tax cut is we've got a short-term crisis creating a sort of a fuel shortage, creating a fuel price spike, cost of living spike. Let's give some relief. So kind of a stimulus package thinking. How can we help these people? Oh, we can help them by cutting their petrol prices a little bit during this time. And that's the internal logic, I think, that's being used by the government, by the opposition, by the media who pushed it. And some commentators have noted that, look, this is not a particularly direct or efficient or effective way of handing out stimulus. And I think the government's argument kind of makes sense on its own ground. The critics do have kind of a good point, and it's all the wrong conversation. Right? This is the point of the newsletter I put out a couple of weeks ago, is that when this crisis causes a recession, the incentive in politics is going to be to put out a stimulus package. And we're already, in my opinion, starting to see this stimulus thinking. And my argument is not to get involved in either side of that, but just to say that's the wrong framework to be looking at this issue. No amount of stimulus is going to make the fuel shortage go away, and therefore the consequences of the fuel shortage go away. We should be looking at this, I would argue, through the lens of productivity. And not just because we've got a recession now, that's the lens we should have been looking at it last year or the year before. Now, it could be this crisis gives us an opportunity to actually do something that's good for productivity that we might not have been able to politically achieve before. But the goal here should not be stimulus and this will sound really crass, it's not about helping the individual people. It's about taking the opportunity to rearrange the economy in such a way that we can have productivity growth again, because we haven't had any for 10 years. And this lost decade, I mean, Cam was saying the lost decade has moved from Japan to Canada. I'm preemptively already moving it across to Australia. But we had the lost decade of stagnant productivity. And the words productivity, they sound all boffiny and nerdy, like a bunch of like three economists sitting around Brisbane on a computer, sort of waxing lyrical about a graph. It's about more than a graph. It's about, do prices go up more than your wages do? I mean, when people talk about the cost of living problem, they're talking about a productivity problem. They're just using different words to describe it, right? When we're talking about the government having budget deficits or debt that they might not be able to pay off, that's because they're unable to grow because they don't have this productivity growth. I mean, productivity growth undergirds, I think, a lot of what we take for granted in a successful society. And the longer you lose it, I think the more you're going to notice and the more you're going to see problems in society bubbling up. So it is a real problem, and it already was before this crisis. If you've been watching this show, this is not the first time Gina or I have said productivity. We say it every time you come here, long before America started playing around in Iran. But you can't fix the recession. Stimulus, in my opinion, basically doesn't work. What can work is productivity reform would have been good even without this crisis. This crisis might allow us to do it, and at least it'll help us to grow out of the recession quicker. So let's only look at this through the productivity lens. And through the productivity lens, you would have heard this before from me, the only way to increase productivity is to increase productive investment and innovation. And I would argue that the way you incentivize both of those is lower taxes, less regulation, and cheaper energy. And if you've been listening to this show for a while, you'd have heard me give that sort of standard A leads to B leads to C rationale many times over. Normally, I give that rationale and then I focus on the lower taxes. I mean, it's the Australian Taxpayers Alliance. It's not surprising that I would be focusing on that part. But I've always said those three parts: lower taxes, less regulation, cheaper energy. And in this instance, there's a potential opportunity for the cheaper energy part of the productivity discussion. And how does that fit in? Well, the link between productivity and energy prices is pretty obvious. Energy is involved in every element, basically, of production and transport, of creating things and having things in places where you can buy them. The cheaper the energy, that means the more stuff you're able to have with fewer other inputs going into it. And that's basically what productivity is, allowing higher wages with cheaper goods, which is the very thing we're trying to achieve. And if you put a bigger tax on that energy, you are putting more sand in the gears. And if you take that tax off, you are potentially taking that sand out of the gears, decreasing that cost and allowing productivity to increase through that energy side. So I would say I'm sympathetic to the idea of a tax cut, but the rationale isn't stimulus. The rationale should be productivity. And the distinction matters because you can imagine some political type saying, oh, John, you wanker, who cares what the rationale is as long as the policy is the same? Well, two things. One is if you start using the wrong rationale, that wrong rationale can easily be used for policies that really are just fully bad policies. Right? So we want to make sure we're building up the correct argument, because what argument we use now could be used against us. And if you're using the wrong argument, there's plenty of bad stimulus policies that could come down the pipeline. And we'd have our hands tied because we already said, oh, we were using the stimulus argument. So don't use the wrong argument to start with. And secondly, it only justifies a temporary measure. And now I eventually come full circle back to the point of the newsletter today. The productivity argument justifies a permanent measure, right? High energy prices, artificially high energy prices, hold back productivity now and next year and last year, and whether the US invades Iran or not, right? It's just what I would say, objectively, a good policy to help boost productivity. And so there is no reason to only have that for 3 months. So I would say make it permanent for productivity reasons. That is the case. Ladies and gentlemen, where am I wrong? Gene, do you want to go first?
Yeah, well, John, I fully support having lower taxes. The big challenge is how do you pay for it? Because at the moment the budget's in deficit. So look, I mean, how do you actually pay for it? Are you just assuming we run up more debt, we have a higher interest bill? Or, I mean, and the risk there is that then if the budget is in if they are adding to the debt, then there's going to be more. They'll rely more on bracket creep. They won't return as much in income taxes. So we could end up swapping the fuel excise for higher income tax than in the alternative. So I just wonder how do you propose to pay for it? I mean, I think lower taxes would be wonderful. We've got a large government sector that those taxes and excise are funding. So how are we paying for it?
Yeah, so to go with it, this goes back to, we've bounced this idea back and forth plenty of times. We are both, correct me if I'm wrong, if I'm speaking inappropriately on your behalf, we are both believers that the government should decrease their amount of spending, in my opinion, especially at a federal level, and decrease the amount of tax so that you can get the budget close to balance. I don't care if it's balanced, but closer to balance, and get the burden off taxpayers. So I agree that would be ideal. But of course, in a non-ideal world, we are then eventually asked the question of, well, if you have to pick one, which do you pick? And I think both you and I, in our younger days, said, I balanced the budget. Look, cut the taxes when you cut the spending. Balance the budget. Make sure it's roughly balanced. And then work to cut the spending. And when you do, you can cut the taxes. And I think, and correct me if I'm wrong, but you are still at least somewhat sympathetic to that conventional approach that we grew up on, whereas I, in my old crusty grey-haired age, have started to become sympathetic to the idea, if I have to pick one, I am sufficiently worried about the productivity situation in Australia that I think the whole system is probably not going to fix itself unless we fix productivity somehow. So I would take the step to try and fix productivity first. I still want the spending down, but if forced to pick, print me some money, Cam. That's the way it goes, isn't it?
Wow, interesting.
Well, look, I don't know if I'd print the money. And look, firstly, a whole different topic. We should do this someday. I think what I call moderate MMT has some legs, but I think most people who support MMT aren't supporting moderate MMT. They're supporting a version that I think would destroy an economy. So we could talk about that another time. Realistically, I'd be talking it. We would, if the government refused to cut spending along with the cutting of tax, then we would talk about a slightly higher deficit. Unfortunately, I'd keep pushing for the spending cuts, but. I don't want to. There are so few opportunities to achieve productivity reform. If there's one on the table, I want to run with it now because I don't want to let the perfect be the enemy of the good. But Cam, over to you.
So one argument against this is that you use more efficiently the higher priced input in production, where you have a choice of reorganizing production. And if you want to use energy efficiently, i.e. most productively, then a higher price sort of incentivizes at incremental steps, like in the 70s oil shock, much more efficient engines, mopeds instead of big heavy cars, a reorganizing of the energy system to be much, much more efficient. That wouldn't have happened without the higher price of that input. So it's a little bit like saying, why do we want high wages? Well, because we reorganize to use humans the most efficient way possible when the wages are high. We don't just have them digging holes with spoons because the wages are high, right? We use them more productively. So, is that the true story in the long run? I'm not sure. I'm just saying that these effects probably offset to some degree the scale of your productivity argument or there's energy and everything type of argument. Would you think?
I think we could get caught up. Maybe it is worth getting caught up here in different sort of definitions of productivity. So energy productivity would be to use the energy most productively. And if you use the energy most productively, you would get the highest return on each unit of energy. That sounds nice and all. I'm far more interested, accuse me of being a lefty in my old age, of the humans. So I would be more interested in using labor most productively. And if I used energy inefficiently in a drive towards using labor most efficiently, then labor would get the highest return on their input, which is wages. I'm more worried about the labor productivity than the energy productivity. having said all of that, I'm not actually arguing for a big subsidies here. I'm arguing to get rid of what I consider to be an overburden. So I'm not arguing that the government should step in and provide free everything, free energy, free communications, free NBN. I'm not making that case. I'm saying that there are instances where I think their foot is on the scale in the other direction. And I think the current fuel tax is higher than... Now, if you were going to get it
and
down
just quickly, what is the current tax and
the,
what is the current one?
It's got 53 cents, 53 cents a litre. It's like 52.6 cents, but all these decimals, I don't follow it.
And so it'll be half
it's about
that
53 cents. Then plus the GST, right? So you have to add on another 5.3 cents on top because there's a GST on the excise. The GST is on the fuel, but it's also on the excise. So the GST on the excise kind of counts as part of that tax story. And then, of course, there's the GST on the rest of the fuel, but that's a bit of a different topic. So yeah, that'll be halved for 3 months, and then you've got the road user charge, which is also going to be removed because effectively the petrol tax you pay for a truck is different to the petrol tax you pay for a car. They take all the tax off and then they reboot some on, so that you've got instead of a 53 cent tax, trucks pay can't do this 36 cents equivalent. That may be wrong. It's in the 30s, right? But you get the idea, right? So trucks pay effectively a different fuel tax than the rest of us. And that goes to 0 for 3 months, and the fuel tax goes to from 53.
And what's the budget cost for this for 3 months?
Now,
do we know?
About 2 to 3 billion, I think it is, because it's that doesn't.
So if this was permanent,
total fuel excise is about 18, about 9.
9 a year.
Maybe 9 or 10, because the total fuel excise is about 18, I think. So that just allows us to do the quick maths.
That's fine. And total public spending is what, 400 billion across the states and the federal government?
I think it's
just trying to get an order of magnitude of what.
Well, the Commonwealth budget's about 700 billion. So
no, that's not right. 700 billion is half that's a third of our economy. No, I think the 700 might be the total, including the states. Anyway,
have a look at the latest budget, John. I mean, because we've got a $2.5 trillion economy now.
Yeah. It's 1 trillion total levels of government.
1 trillion. Okay.
So 1,000 billion, and we're talking about 9 a year for this for half. So what's that? 0.9%. Just getting some ballpark numbers out there.
Now, I got to say in all of this, because I was giving some more thought to this today. If I could just have carte blanche, if I was the dictator, this is not the first move I would do. This is probably not the second or the third or the fourth move I would do. It is just the move that may be politically possible to do that I also think is a correct move, right? So I would prefer to do something that is in the correct direction rather than stomping my feet and insisting, no, only my top 2 options or nothing at all. I would probably just go back to, firstly, indexing tax brackets and cutting some tax rates and the family tax policy that we've all discussed before that I think you like, Cam, and my policy on concessional tax on savings, which I think you don't like, Cam. But so those would be my first order of priority. The fuel tax would be behind all of those. But I don't think the fuel tax cut is the wrong sort of policy. I think it's the right sort of policy and should be made permanent. It would just be like my 10th or 20th order of priority if I was listing them in what I thought was the most important to do. But don't let the enemy be the perfect of the good, as they say. Any other thoughts on that, gents? I expected more pushback. Should I give my best argument against myself?
What is your... Yeah, okay, I'd like to hear that. Just quickly.
User pays. The user pays system. I mean, this is roads to some degree are a natural monopoly, so you can understand the government potentially stepping in to create them, but that doesn't mean the government needs to step in to provide them for free. Okay. We get water and sewage. The government steps in to help provide it. They charge us. People kind of understand that. You get, what's another equivalent? Ports, airports. They are mostly user pays for cost recovery for those pieces of infrastructure. Road, another piece of infrastructure. Cost recovery would ensure that, would ensure potentially, Pareto optimality, that you would use energy most productively and labor most productively. Now, I'm far more interested in using the labor more productively, but, fine, you could have both there if you set the correct user pays. Now, of course, the better solution would be, of course, to privatize all the roads. But, within the Overton window, a user pays system would probably look more like tolls, but some sort of a fuel tax could be described as a proxy for that. Now, I think there's some legs in that argument, right? I'm a bit sympathetic to the idea, because if you're not having user pays there, then you are having to have the roads cross-subsidized by what effectively ends up being taxes on other parts of the economy, which I don't want to see. So I think there's some legs to that argument. However, I would argue at the moment, firstly, the level of government is wrong. The federal government doesn't build any roads. So this is to do with the High Court cases, in my opinion, incorrect interpretation of the Constitution, saying the state governments can't have fuel taxes. But that is the reality we live in at the moment. They are raising something like $18 billion, and the federal government is then handing out something in the order of, I think, about $9 or $10 billion. So the federal government is already spending roughly half. So if you halve the fuel tax, you actually would then align the fuel tax with the amount of money the federal government is spending on roads. And when I say spending on roads, I should say they don't build their own roads. They hand that money over to states to build roads. The states then also raise money through regos, through traffic fines, through stamp duty on car sales, and they receive some of the GST, some of which comes from GST on fuel, and they run some of the states run, I think New South Wales runs government tolls on government toll roads. You bundle all that together and it basically covers the costs of running roads. We do have roughly a user pay system. We have a user pay system plus slightly too much fuel excise, in my opinion. So that's why I think I've seen other people say they look at halving the fuel tax for 3 months and their response is don't halve it, cut it entirely. I would much prefer to say, fine, just halve it. Let's be moderate there, but make it permanent. That's the part I really want to fix, the permanence. And perhaps that half level is the level you need on current user pays for roads, unless people want to go the more libertarian position of having more toll roads and privatizing more roads, which I'm all for. But if we want the governments to build the roads, some amount of user pays, I think makes sense. It's better than increasing other taxes and having that cross-subsidized. But I think my proposal fits within that framework. If I were to cut taxes more sharply than what I'm suggesting, I may be guilty of the criticism I just gave myself and then defended myself from. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that's good,
sounds
John.
all good.
Yeah, did you put that in your newsletter? I think that's a nice little.
No, I try to keep them short and sharp and invite people to the live stream if they want to see it fleshed out in more detail.
Okay, good stuff.
Yeah,
that might be the first time I've done a John versus John debate at the end.
We got to charge you for your electric car somehow, mate, to fund these roads. So all roads are the secret.
Yeah, well, it makes sense for some of the bigger roads, I think, especially for new big developments, right? New big developments the government doesn't know how to fund. Anyway, I don't want to get too far further down that rabbit hole. I've done that enough. We're coming up to an hour 50. I want to get through the questions and try to get out of here within 2 hours. So, gentlemen, Gene, you might want to start looking at the questions from the bottom up. I will look at the questions from the top down, and we'll see what we can find. So Anna, who is, I think, Gene, one of your biggest fans, although good news for you, Gene, she found a new nemesis in Ruddock last time when he was here. Excessive taxation is theft. Reason for declining birth rates. Well, three things. All taxation is theft. Secondly, it's not actually theft, it's extortion, if you want to be technically correct, because there are pedants on the left who then point out that that's technical definition. So taxation is extortion. Then the open question is whether you think it's moral extortion or not, because I don't say that sentence with a moral loading. The moral loading comes afterwards. I think it is humanly possible to morally justify extortion in some circumstances. It just so happens I don't think the government passes those circumstances. But anyway, that's getting quite radical. The second part of that sentence, reason for declining birth rates. I mean, it's possible. I don't know. I was originally thinking that doesn't correlate. And then I was thinking, no, birth rates were pretty low in the Soviet countries. Birth rates are pretty low in the existing communist countries. And as the West got higher taxes, our birth rates declined. There's some correlation. I mean, what do you guys think? Is that ruling that one out a priori, or is there legs?
Well,
I
mean,
think
there's
it's
no tax
possible,
in
but
some places. Yeah.
yeah, I mean, I suppose it's
Yeah.
possible. I've never seen that as a hypothesis that's been tested. I mean, isn't it due to? It's due partly to more women in the workforce, and then focusing on careers and delaying having children. That's a big part of it, isn't it?
Well, couldn't
That's
that
the
be
big
due to the
driver
fact?
of it.
Couldn't that itself have come from the fact that a one-income family these days struggle because they pay so much tax that you might need the second income? I mean, I'm just thinking on
Yeah,
my feet here, but it's
yeah. I mean, it's possible. I think it could certainly have a contribution to it, so that yeah. I mean, it's possible that they may have to. They could. They could make choices where they're not forced into the workforce. I suppose. Yeah, that's
there's going
potentially
to be
right.
some amount of observational equivalence here because of excessive tax nearly always comes with excessive government spending. So it could
Yeah.
be that the tax doesn't cause the declining birth rate. It could be that spending is spent in such a way as to subsidize a lifestyle that ends up having lower birth rates. And again, none of this was pre-planned. This is all just top of the head. So maybe that's stupid. Cam, what was your take?
Well, I mean, declining birth rates are a global phenomenon. Even in, the Gulf countries, we're talking about UAE, Qatar, Bahrain, Oman, Kuwait, Saudi Arabia. They don't have any income taxes. They're all just the government's funded from oil profits, and birth rates have plummeted as well. So, I think there's a cultural story much more than an economic one. It's very hard to say, we're as rich as we've ever been as a society, and somehow we can't afford to have kids because of taxes. There's some other cultural change with women and men, family formation and working, especially in those childbearing years, that has changed. I don't know exactly what or how to change it.
One of the reasons I love this topic, so which I find it so interesting, is nearly every thesis you can find, then you find a bunch of sort of anecdotally supporting evidence. You can nearly always find a counterexample that says, well, that's probably not it then. I mean, nearly everything you can think of, I can find a counterexample, except probably just the increased female workforce participation one, which seems a constant thing. And wealth, and wealth itself seems to be a people say I can't afford to have kids, and then they just look around a map and they see that average GDP per person of everyone who's still having 6 kids. It's like, you sure you can't afford it, or is it a lifestyle choice? All right. Another one from Anna. The West should have never established economic or political ties with communist or Islamic nations. Yeah, I'm not sure I agree with that. I think there is a case,
peace, right? Like trade, you got to be friendly to each other, right?
The conventional wisdom is there used to be no two countries that had a McDonald's that had been to war with each other, but then Bill Clinton bombed Serbia. So he's ruined it now. There's probably a McDonald's in Iran for all I know. Look, I think there is something to say for the idea that we should be more proactively trying to create closer ties to countries that we feel we can trust long-term, sort of geopolitically, strategically, and that we can understand easier. I don't think that requires cutting off the other countries, but I think I am coming around to the idea of some amount of discrimination. That's implicit in the idea of free trade deals, right? That's implicitly discriminating for the countries that have the deals. And we in Australia already have a free immigration agreement with New Zealand. I think we could consider expanding that idea out to other countries to allow us to more proactively to discriminate. And we've seen in the last couple of months the consequences of being closely tied to countries that are more geopolitically risky. But yeah, I wouldn't go so far as to say no ties, but maybe I'm just weak, Anna. Capital gains tax on property. I'll throw out one to you, Cam, because Jean and I have discussed it to death previously. What do you think will happen? What should happen?
I'm pretty sure the change is being discussed, and not just for housing or property, but just in general, the treatment of capital gains. I've got no real strong view on what that should be. You can reduce the discount. I'm fine with that. You could, at the end of the day, Are we going to charge capital gains on your principal place of residence as well? Because that's a 100% capital gains tax discount on that asset. And people don't like to talk about that one. We all want those.
Well, let's talk about it. What would the Cam Murray dictatorship policy be on capital gains tax on your place of residence?
Well, I think in the US you pay capital gains on your residence. I'm just going to check that.
You get a mortgage interest deduction too, don't you? So I think if you were going to charge capital gains on principal place of residence, you'd also have to let people tax deduct interest payments. Yeah.
Well, this gets really. I think the administrative realities are you going to let us deduct maintenance as well? Because I'm just going to do.
Yeah.
So where do you draw the line on that? So the US has some pretty arbitrary lines. You get 250,000 tax free. You get a certain amount of mortgage interest, but not other costs to deduct against the gain. It gets really complicated as well because it's going to inhibit relocations or moving, like any extra charge. So I think it's fine. Honestly, I don't have a strong view. The tax system works. I'm more of a just enforce the taxes you have efficiently. I don't think 50. Is 40% going to change the world? The discount instead of 50%. I don't know. It'll change the composition of who pays taxes, but I don't know.
Catch up on what we discussed previously is I'm somewhat sympathetic to the idea of returning to the old system of cost-based indexation, but I would argue cost-based indexation to inflation plus a nominal amount to compensate for the time value of money. So 1-2%, I don't know what it would be. We could argue it. So that would mean large speculative gains under my system would end up paying slightly more capital gains tax, but most non-speculative sort of grinding returns would end up paying less capital gains tax under my proposal. And I think that's actually quite a good little consequence from it, as well as I think it's just more strictly fair. It would just ensure more strictly equal treatment of all types of income across the system. So great.
That seems reasonable to me. I mean, I'm very pro simplicity, and just dividing something in two and then chucking it into is very simple.
That is simple. Right.
Whereas,
and without computers, it makes sense.
Yeah, if you've got a property where you've spent on different capital and you're depreciating different things, and then you're like, well, okay, I'm depreciating that, but I'm inflating that by CPI plus something, and I've basically got a huge DCF per asset. That's fine. You can do it. It's probably, it's going to be not super easy for most people, but
I think it'd be a pretty ezy piece of software that people just type in an asset when they buy it, and it'll be done for them. But it's in terms of the on your home, the thought that occurs to me is something along the lines of the capital gains tax doesn't apply up to a house value of the national average house times some 1.5 or something like that. Well, I wouldn't go 2 or 3. I think the house value twice the average, maybe and then the capital gains tax that's equivalent is only the parts above that. So then you'd start getting some revenue out of it, but you would be skipping most people, and you would be skipping regions that are relatively poorer. So that's one thing to consider.
Brilliant. Let's do that, John. Let's get more tax from capital gains.
Well, when you're the dictator,
we can decrease other ones like the fuel excise. And
I want my index bracket, tax bracket indexation. That's the one I really want.
Okay, fair enough.
Talk of intergenerational tax, aka death tax, negative gearing in the May budget. Yes, I think
definitely.
I don't think we'll have death taxes. Don't think we'll have. Look, I think if they did something on negative gearing and capital gains taxes and bundled it in with serious other tax reform that people like us talk about, they might be able to get away with it. I suspect they won't. The problem with these tax reform bundles is they end up focusing really closely on all the tax increases because that's the only way they can think of balancing the budget. And they don't offer us sufficient tax cuts on the other side to be able to, there's no sugar in the medicine to make the medicine go down. If it was revenue negative, I would take a lot of these ideas that people consider untouchable. But I don't think that's what we've got. It would be nice to see on the Liberal side if they started to say, look, we're theoretically open to it as long as it's a part of a very serious package. I don't think Labour will meet their criteria, so the Liberals would still be able to campaign against it, so that politics still works for them. But that would give them the leeway later when they get into power of actually putting together a comprehensive package if they had the guts to do it, which, of course, that's a big question.
Fair.
On the question of war, Space, you're a ratbag commie, but I agree with you totally on this issue. I suspect we're on the same page when it comes to war.
It's too late. We're part of ANZUS, aren't we? I mean, the US is a major ally of ours. We've got no choice. I mean, really, they've got their bases all over Australia. We've got the most important spy base in the world at Pine Gap.
I don't think ANZUS ties us to invading every country that America invades. I mean, I think NATO is a defensive alliance. AUKUS is ANZUS is a defensive alliance.
Yeah.
I think if they attack countries, we can declare neutrality. But
yeah, okay, that's fair enough. But I don't think we can pursue neutrality. My take on Space's comment is we should essentially just say we're not allied with the US. I mean, we're neutral. We're going to be non-aligned. We're going to be like Indonesia or somewhere like that, where we're taking this alternative approach, which I don't think makes any sense. I mean, we should be a strong ally of the United States. I mean, our security depends upon it very strongly.
Well, I think the only country that could successfully invade Australia at the moment is the US. So to that degree, we want to have a good enough relationship with them that they don't invade us. But I think people sometimes overestimate the ability of another country to successfully take Australia, or maybe they underestimate our defensive capabilities. But that's a much bigger topic for another day. Unless do you have anything on neutrality and defense policy? So many nations are dumping the US dollar. The US is struggling to sell their debt. I don't know if struggling is true, but the bond yields have gone up. They've gone up noticeably. So that could be an interesting question. I mean, that is another cost of this war that is going to bite a lot of countries, because bond yields have gone up in Australia as well. If it blips up and blips down, fine. If it stays up for a while, that just means all of the government's debt they're rolling over is now being rolled over at a higher interest rate. And same in the US. And the US has an eye-watering amount of debt. So it's another reason why Iran is incentivized to keep the war going. But we'll see. I've heard this idea a few times that the shit's going to hit the fan, but they want to let people have Easter first. So fair enough. Thank you, then. Thank you. We'll eat too much chocolate.
That's why I was wondering if they were preparing a stronger message for the PM on Thursday night, and then they just chickened out of it later in the afternoon. Because what he ended up saying, you think, why on earth did you make an announcement? I mean, even if it was about expectations management, I'm not sure that what he did actually sets us up for this post-Easter. I still think it was a bit of a waste of time. That I think maybe they were planning something a bit stronger or a stronger message, and they changed their mind.
No, it's for the normies. It's for the normies. We don't know what normies think like because we're weird.
Okay.
By definition, if you're on this show or you're listening to this show, you're not a normal person. Congratulations, normal is overrated. But there are normal people out there, and occasionally politicians need to speak to them too. They even get to vote sometimes. It's outrageous. So, sorry, Cam. Gene and I have an ongoing sort of background argument. He believes, you wouldn't believe this, he believes that democracy works, which I think is ridiculous. So we have that an ongoing back and forth.
It works better than the alternative, I would say. I mean, over the long run, I think it's It's the least worst system. Well, whatever Churchill said about democracy, it's the worst system except for all the others. Yeah.
I'm not convinced. We haven't had long enough yet. They say, who was it that they asked, what did you think of the French Revolution? I think they asked him in the 20th century, and he said, I don't know. It's been too soon to tell.
Deng Xiaoping.
It's too soon to tell.
Yeah. Very true.
There's no supply. We can have trucks of money with no diesel in it. Yeah, well, you can just burn the money and that'll work. You can turn coal into diesel.
Well, this is the whole... this is where I think we should get Jared on the show. Jared Holland from Page Research Centre's just put out a paper on our fuel security, and I think they're recommending we look at the commercialization of that technology, see if we can develop it. So what is it, the coal to liquids, or
Coal to liquid, yeah.
Yeah.
I think gas to liquid would be cheaper. But what I've said before is we need to answer two questions. What's the cheapest way to get fuel? And then secondly, we need to know the answer to the question, what's the cheapest way to get fuel if the world goes insane and our trade networks are disrupted? And that doesn't mean we need to do everything that the second question, the second question, whatever the answer to that is, we don't necessarily have to do that in full, but we need to know the answer to that. And there's going to be a lot of people rushing to quickly, we need biodiesel. Quickly, everything needs to be electrified in EVs. Quickly, we need coal to liquid or gas to liquid or bigger stockpiles or drill, baby, drill. Any of those could be true. I don't think we know the answer yet to which of those is the best way forward. But I think that's the first thing we need to know. Like, don't go forward with coal to liquid if gas to liquid is cheaper. Do we know the answer to that yet? So, price mechanism, Iran's greatest weapon against America. Well, the fact that it's moving slowly is the weapon, right? It's the fact that markets don't shift to a new equilibrium spontaneously. Time exists. As the institutional economists taught us, time exists, which makes some of the old models a little bit less robust once you factor that in. If you had to ration diesel, who would miss out? Ag users did the 6 mil, heavy transport 23 mil, mining 28 mil. I don't know, who should we cut, fellas?
Why don't we use the price to work out who values it the most?
Revolutionary idea. That's what I've got from the ones I've saved. There's 40 messages have come in while I've been. All
right.
Is it
I'm gonna run. All right, these are
All right. Well, let me take that one down. Is that? We're just about finished there. I might have a look at the last couple of questions once you're off, Cam. But before we go, thank you very much for joining us. We've made 2 hours. Before we go, any last comments on what we've gone through today? Anything interesting or stand out to you?
Yeah, I think the standout thing is that John Humphreys told me he doesn't trust the price mechanism and is happy to tax capital more. And I'm just in shock. I don't know if I'll be able to sleep tonight. That's
and print money, right? You got to print me that money to fill up the budget.
I just, it's going to take a while to digest this. I probably won't be able to sleep. That's what I've got from it. Thanks, John.
Well, you'll only be out of equilibrium in the short run, because in the long run, you'll come back into equilibrium and it'll all make sense again. So anyway, Cam, thank you very much for coming in. Very much appreciated your wit and wisdom. And
thanks, guys.
Look forward to having you back sometime.
Thanks, Cam.
Yeah, see you next time. Thanks, Gene. Thanks, John.
So, Gene, I'm going to run through just a few more of these.
Yep.
You want to stick with me, or?
Yeah, I'll stick with you for sure. There's some great. There was some great chat there tonight. I was really impressed with.
Some of it's a bit mean. All right, what's the rest of this? This is Space and Anna again debating, I think, the nuances of Marxism and fascism, which happens every Thursday night over on YouTube. If you're watching this on a different platform, the chat goes off quite an interesting way over on YouTube. So I suggest check it out over there if you like. Pete, yes, the heavy use, the road user charge was an important part of what they did. I got to say, just generally, the government hasn't acted too badly. I mean, I've been doing a defense for the government this episode, which is not what I expect to do, right? This is the problem if you come in with a true false filter instead of an us-them filter. Occasionally, you have to defend the quote-unquote baddies. But I will withhold judgment until I see what they do in the budget, because I fear they're saving up all of their dumbest ideas for the budget. But at the moment, their policies has been to underwrite purchases of international oil to increase the chance that the oil gets into the country, because some buyers of oil are worried they will pay the high price internationally, and then by the time the oil lands in Australia, the prices have gone down and they'll lose money on that shipment. And so the government is using one of their development banks to basically take on that risk, which is a dirty little secret of Australia. Our federal government has, I think, six development banks, which is also the thing I find amusing about Jared Rennick always saying that Australia needs a development bank or an infrastructure bank. We have 6 of them. Well, I guess a
Yeah,
seventh one
well,
is going to
we've
be the
got-
difference. But
So
one
you're
of them is
talking
being
about-
required to do this underwriting.
Yeah, you're talking about EFIC, are you? Export Finance Insurance Corporation. I think that's the one doing it.
I think it's
Or
EFA.
maybe
right?
they've
Export
changed the
Finance
name.
Australia. Yeah, but yes, it's Export Finance. I think Australia, but EFA, they're the ones doing that. They're also doing, I think, another couple of $1 billion of interest-free loans to crucial infrastructure and fuel supply businesses. That's also coming out of another development bank. That's a different one. That's I can't remember the name of that development bank.
It's not Clean Energy Finance Corporation, is it?
No, it's that's the biggest development bank we have in Australia. I think it's the second biggest development bank is the one that this is coming. Now, my complaint with that is I understand the instinct to do both of those. My complaint is that the main cost of those probably isn't going to show up on the budget. So the government is doing it in such a way that it's all off budget, which that annoys me about those projects.
Well, in terms of the cost, what are you talking about? Because the cost in terms of the net interest cost that shows up in the budget, but you're talking about there's a whole bunch of risk. Yeah, the bad debts. Yeah. Okay, gotcha. Yeah.
So the bad debts will just show up as a loss for the government development bank, which isn't on the budget, and then the government will transfer money into the development bank to top them up, but that doesn't show up in the budget either because that's just changing your assets, not actually spending money.
Yeah.
So it's a very cheeky way of shuffling money around. And interestingly, by the way, I didn't know this beforehand, but the government can give instructions to these development banks. That's very common, right? So the government writes legislation, and in the legislation it says the government of the day can just sort of give instructions for how things work. That doesn't have to go through Parliament, but Parliament can normally then overrule it. So they can come back and what's it called? Disallowance. They can move a disallowance. If someone moves a disallowance, that blocks the government's regulatory change. With these government development banks, you can't move a disallowance. The government can just give them new instructions for what to do, and that's it. So I don't know, anyone from the Liberal Party or One Nation or whichever right-wing party eventually gets back into power, you're not going to control the Senate. You are going to have total carte blanche to just tell the 6 development banks with over $100 billion under management where they should be putting that money. So that is a hell of a political lever that is currently mostly being used to cross-subsidize the renewables, but could be used in a different way if we had a smarter and gutsier right-wing government in someday. So, look out for that one. People should be donkey voting. Just so you know, donkey voting is still a legitimate vote. It just means you vote for whoever is at the top of the ballot. You may be thinking of informal voting, which is where you just draw something or scrunch it up or throw it away. Donkey voting is just gives, because a bunch of people follow your advice, it gives about a 1% extra free vote to whoever's at the top of the ballot. So look at those close ballots, those close races that are won by like 0.5% or 0.3%. If the winning candidate was at the top of the ballot, they probably didn't win on people voting for them on purpose. A bunch of donkey voters got them over the line. So, yeah. Someone commenting on coal to liquid? Just like China. Yes, absolutely. China has that as a backup, right? They don't normally use it because they can import their fuel. But if they can't import, then they've got that as a backup. So that's why people are probably thinking about it. I think it's 53 now, but yeah, this is answering our old questions. Did you go through it? You're looking from the bottom up, and let me know what you see. Oh, there's Pete telling me what their road user charge was. He thinks it's 32. So. I don't think Malinowskis is a communist. I'm not sure if they had much of a better option to vote for on the Liberals there either. Yes, unfortunately, higher education also seems to be associated with lower birth rates. I think it's because it gets people into the adult part of their life later, as part of my theory. I mean, this is one of the theories that I'm still holding to and playing around with. There are certain moments in life that get you into your adulthood, where you become a proper adult. And I think part of that is You get a job, you buy a house, you go to war, you get married. These things are all kind of associated. They're bundled together. And increasingly these days, look, women don't normally go to war historically, but these days, increasingly people don't go to war. They don't get out of school until they're 25. They can't buy a house until they're like 40. So every other indication of adulthood is gone. And then we expect these 26-year-old sort of extended adolescents to settle down, get married, and have kids. So,
yeah. There's also the assortative matching dimension too, isn't there? The fact that
from the women's education.
Yeah, because women are graduate. There are more female graduates from unis than male now, and so that's an issue too.
That's only an issue because women are hypergamous. I mean, men never had a problem dating down. Dating down in class, dating down in stature, dating down in education, dating down in income. Men have never had a problem with that. Historically, women have. So that's an interesting one. One of the solutions there is to try and convince women to stop being hypergamous. But you could also try to, I guess, convince lions to stop eating impalas. But good luck. We'll see if we can try. All right. Did you find any there, or?
Well, there's just a lot of comments. So, I mean, I think we've dealt with the main ones and the main issues. So, yeah, I think it's all good.
There's a bit of chat about the vaccine in there.
Well, what's interesting about the government's approach? So, look, maybe I should be more charitable towards them. I was just disappointed last night with that speech because I, tuned in, and as did half of Australia. I think we're all expecting something major or something profound, and it was, what is this? But look, I think the government, at least, it is worried about not replicating the mistakes of the COVID period. I get that sense that Albo doesn't want to impose restrictions. He'd be very reluctant to impose restrictions because he sees the problems, just how unpopular the COVID restrictions were. So at least that's something positive about how he's thinking about it at the moment. But let's see how long that lasts.
Yeah, I don't think he wants to go down that path, thankfully. So, although if there's not enough fuel, then it is going to be rationed one way or the other. I prefer it to be rationed through price, as Cam kept teasing before. But if it is eventually rationed, it is going to be divvied up, and someone's going to miss out. If it doesn't exist, that just literally is going to happen. It's unlike COVID. With COVID, there was an outside we could walk to, and they wouldn't let us. Right, so that was a taking away something that was right there, and an arbitrary authority figure was not letting us go. There was petrol in Australia. An arbitrary authority figure was blocking us from getting it. If there literally is no petrol, that's kind of a different case, right? It's not really up to them. That's a good point, by the way. Another little issue. We talk about the fuel and the fertilizer coming out of the Middle East. There's also helium, which you're probably not huffing helium most days of your life, but I believe it is used in the making of chips. Yeah, chip manufacturing in Taiwan. So could be an issue. And Anna has turned, I shouldn't say away from Trump. I don't know if Anna was ever a supporter, but she is not on the Trump train. I'll put it that way. All right.
There was someone who...
I think that's... yeah.
I was just going to put up this one. I was born 3 years after Pauline first came around. I suppose, are they saying that, well, it's not just all you old Gen Xers or boomers who are switching to Pauline, maybe it's the younger people. So I don't know whether they were commenting on my thesis, my hypothesis, that I think it's a lot of people who remember or have just seen, who have been impressed. Not that I'm necessarily one of them, but there are a lot of people who are impressed by the consistency of Pauline Hanson over the last 30 or so years. And so that's why they're now coming around to her because they think, well, hang on, Pauline's right, so let's all vote One Nation now. But I just wonder.
My reading of the polls is the boomers are the last people staying loyal to the Libs, right? They've spent they've got such a muscle memory of always going back to the Libs that I don't think they can get out of that. They'll just stay loyal until they die out. They'll be the last vestiges. It's the Gen X and millennials that are shifting to One Nation. I don't know if the what comes after the millennials, the Zoomers. I don't know if the Zoomers have got there yet in Australia. They're still quite left-wing, but that'll happen. So this would be a Zoomer, born in 99, 3 years after Pauline came on the scene. So that's a Zoomer. But I suspect Gen Alpha is going to be far less left-wing than most generations are when they were at a younger age. That's the next one.
Right.
Gen Alpha. That's my 3 kids are Gen Alpha. So,
wow.
We'll see. I'll bring them up a bit tougher.
It's extraordinary when you think. I mean, they'll conceivably live into the next century. Yeah, extraordinary.
Inshallah, brother. Inshallah. That'll be popular in this group. All right. I think we should call that a day.
Absolutely.
Boomers got caught by the recession. Yep. All right, so Gene, the final thing we normally do at the wrap-up, long chat today, 220. Cam was good value. What was your takeaway from today, or takeaways?
I thought the discussion about the fuel excise was a good one. I think you did a good job in summarising actually arguing against yourself in the end. I thought that was quite clever, and I think that was a good bit of nuance and subtlety that could go into a longer write-up of your newsletter piece. So I think that would be worth doing. So good job there. And, always good having Cam on the show to get his perspective and his forecasts on what's happening with Brisbane. I mean, Brisbane's just been rocketing, and so he's seen potential correction there. So, we'll have to have him on in 6 months or 12 months and see how the market's gone compared with his forecast. And
it was nice to see a bit of optimism.
Yes, remarkable optimism from Cam, yes.
Well, thank you, dear viewers, for sticking with us this far. This is Death and Taxes, live stream podcast from the Australian Taxpayers Alliance. Please go and check us out on Substack. It's Oz Taxpayers, austaxpayers.substack.com. You can see all of the newsletters there. Get involved in the conversation. There's a chat room that's a bit quiet, but you can also just comment on each of the articles. And I do go and check them regularly and engage with people if there's some fun chats. So please do go and check that out. It's it is possible to see everything there for free, but if you wanted to throw us a few pennies, that certainly helps us as well. Also, our website, taxpayers.org.au, it's got some of the campaigns we've been working on there. The campaign to convince the Labor Party to get rid of the 10% Medicare levy, a campaign to convince the Liberal Party to introduce concessional family tax and to index the tax brackets, and free speech campaigns and other things that come up from time to time. So go and check that out. And you can also join up there if you are so inclined. We do this every Thursday, 7:30 p.m. in Queensland, 8:30 p.m. New South Wales, Victoria, 8 p.m. Adelaide, 5:30 p.m. in Perth. I'm getting better at remembering them all. Of course, those times are going to change shortly when we go off daylight savings, or when I should say when you dirty Southerners go off daylight savings. And then we will tell you the new time when we have the new time. But we do this every Thursday. We like to see you here when you can. So please do join us again next week. And until then, stay happy and stay free.